My son-in-law lifted his champagne glass inside the glowing mansion and said, "To family and to our beautiful new home." Everyone applauded. My daughter smiled beside him, but something in her eyes felt wrong. Then an older waitress brushed past me, collecting empty glasses. Without turning her head, she whispered, "Sir, your daughter is in danger." Before I could speak, she slipped a folded note beneath my napkin and vanished into the crowd. I lifted the napkin and read it under the table. A few words were written inside, and suddenly that perfect housewarming party felt like a trap waiting to close. "Thank you for being here with me. Before we start, what are you doing while you listen? Driving, cooking, working, or maybe just taking a quiet moment? Drop a comment and let me know. I read every single one. Quick note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. What matters is the heart of this story." The moment Sterling Blackwell reached into his jacket and pulled out the master control device for his penthouse's smart home system, I knew my daughter had married a man who needed to own everything he touched. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows on the 32nd floor of 1200 Stewart Street, wearing my only decent suit, feeling like a carpenter who'd wandered onto a movie set. 50 guests milled around the luxury penthouse, champagne flutes, catching the October evening light as downtown Seattle sparkled below. At 58, I'd spent 28 years building homes across this city, every beam placed with the precision of a man trying to forget what his hands once knew how to unlock. Leonie moved through the crowd in her designer dress, ivory silk that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, glowing with happiness that made my chest ache. 26 years old and finally settled, she'd told me last week. Sterling treats me like a queen dad. Sterling Blackwell, 35 and commanding every room he entered, guided guests through the penthouse with practiced warmth. "As you can see, every system routes through centralized control," he explained, gesturing to the sleek tablet in his palm. "Temperature, lighting, door locks, security cameras, everything." The guests murmured appreciation. Sterling's smile never wavered as he demonstrated tapping the screen to dim lights, adjust the thermostat, trigger the motorized blinds. The penthouse responded like an obedient animal. "Impressive integration," someone said. "It's about efficiency," Sterling replied. "Why have multiple systems when one brain can manage the whole organism?" I noticed he never mentioned Leonie's name during the tour. Not once. It was Sterling's penthouse, Sterling's system, Sterling's vision. My daughter had become part of the decor. The party flowed around us, catered hors d'oeuvres, jazz through invisible speakers, conversations lubricated by expensive wine. I stuck to sparkling water, my eyes tracking Leonie as she laughed with a group near the kitchen island. That's when the music changed. Some upbeat pop song Leonie loved, the kind she used to play in her apartment. She'd pulled out her phone, smiling as she tapped the screen. The music cut mid-verse. Silence dropped like a guillotine blade. Sterling was across the room in 3 strides. "Let me handle the system, sweetheart." His voice carried that particular warmth wealthy men use when correcting their possessions in public. "You just look beautiful and be the hostess." He tapped his tablet. Different music resumed, instrumental, elegant, forgettable. Leonie's smile froze, and I watched her try to unfreeze it. Watched her laugh like it was funny, like she wasn't embarrassed in front of 50 people who'd just witnessed her husband override her choice with casual authority. "The master app has priority," Sterling explained to the room still smiling. "Can't have competing signals confusing the network." Several guests chuckled. Leonie slipped her phone back into her clutch, her shoulders carrying that particular tension I recognized from her teenage years, the moment before tears, before she'd lock herself away and pretend everything was fine. 28 years in construction taught me one thing. Every structural failure begins with a tiny detail. A nail driven at the wrong angle, a beam cut 3 millimeters short, the kind of flaw you can't see until the weight becomes unbearable and everything collapses. I was watching the flaw. How does a father know when to stop being polite and start being afraid? The party continued. Sterling moved back into host mode, refilling drinks, making introductions, one hand occasionally finding Leonie's lower back in that proprietary gesture men use to mark territory. She leaned into him, playing the role, and maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was the paranoid widower who couldn't accept that his daughter had found happiness in a tax bracket I'd never reach. Maybe. At 8:20, Sterling's phone vibrated. I saw the micro expression flash across his face, something sharp and calculating before the charm slid back into place. He excused himself and stepped onto the glass-enclosed balcony phone to his ear back to the party. I was watching him through the glass when the older waitress approached my table. She had weathered hands and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, the kind of woman who'd perfected invisibility through decades of service work. She moved with practiced efficiency, collecting glasses, wiping down the marble surface. Her body blocked the sightline between me and the rest of the party. Her hand slid beneath my napkin. Something rustled. "Don't react," she whispered, barely audible. "Read it now." Then she was gone, vanished into the circulation of servers and guests like she'd never existed. I lifted the napkin. A piece of paper folded into quarters lay beneath it. My pulse hammered as I unfolded it with hands that had framed 1,000 houses, but suddenly couldn't stay steady. The handwriting was shaky but legible blue ink on white paper. "Get your daughter out of this apartment tonight. When the guests leave, he will make her sign something she cannot take back. The building system is already locked remotely. Address on back. Go now." I turned the paper over. An address in Rainier Valley, scrawled in the same urgent script. The paper weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. I looked up, searching for the waitress. She'd disappeared completely. The catering staff moved through the penthouse like synchronized machinery, but none of them were her. It was as if I'd imagined the entire exchange, except the note was real. The paper creased beneath my thumb, solid and undeniable. Through the glass balcony doors, Sterling lowered his phone. He stood silhouetted against the city lights, 32 stories above the street, and for half a heartbeat, the charming smile was gone. In its place, the cold, calculating expression of a man auditing his assets. Then he turned back toward the party, toward Leonie. The smile returned perfect and practiced, and he reached for the balcony door handle. I had maybe 30 seconds before he returned to the table. 30 seconds to decide if I was a paranoid father, destroying my daughter's happiness based on a stranger's cryptic warning, or if I was the only person in this glass cage who understood that the structural failure had already begun. The note burned in my palm like evidence. Sterling stepped back into the penthouse, and his eyes found mine across the crowd. Sterling's eyes found mine across the penthouse, and in those final seconds before he reached the table, I made a choice that would either save my daughter's life or destroy what was left of our relationship forever. I folded the note into my palm and pushed back from the table. My legs carried me through clusters of guests toward Leonie, who was laughing with a woman in a black cocktail dress. I touched her elbow, leaned close, and let my face twist into something between embarrassment and pain. "Stomach," I muttered loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Give me a minute." Leonie's expression shifted to concern. "Dad, are you okay?" "Kitchen, just need—" I gripped her arm, not hard but insistent, and her eyes locked onto mine. Something in my face must have communicated more than my words, because she didn't argue. She made quick apologies to the woman in black and followed me. We pushed through the kitchen's swinging door into stainless steel and granite. The catering staff barely glanced up from their prep work. I pulled Leonie past the industrial range toward the service corridor, my pulse hammering so loud I could barely hear the jazz filtering through the walls. "Dad, do you trust me?" I stopped, turned, met her eyes. She searched my face. The question hung between us, carrying weight we both felt, but couldn't name. Then she said, "Yes, always." I pushed open the service corridor door. It was narrow, utilitarian, the kind of space wealthy people never saw. Exposed pipes. Electrical conduit, the guts of the building stripped bare. I'd installed systems in a dozen buildings like this one. I knew what I was looking for. The main electrical distribution panel sat behind a decorative panel, exactly where it should be according to code. Siemens AFO S4000. A-Series, the same model I'd wired into half the commercial buildings in downtown Seattle. My fingers moved across the panel with a familiarity that went deeper than carpentry muscle memory. From a different life, one I'd spent 28 years trying to forget. My fingers found the access screws and twisted them free. "Dad, you're scaring me. I need you to not ask questions for 60 seconds. I pulled the panel open. Inside, the main buses gleamed copper, carrying 480 volts to every system in this penthouse: lights, locks, climate control, security. And when I do this, we run straight for the emergency stairs. No stopping, no looking back. Understand?" Leonie's breath caught. "What are you—" I pulled the insulated screwdriver from my pocket, the one I always carried, a Habit from 3 decades of emergency service calls. 28 years of contracting taught me every commercial building has a weak point, and its safest point is often its most vulnerable. Electromagnetic locks hold strong until the power fails. Then NFPA 101 fire code takes over, and every secured door releases automatically. Fail secure becomes fail open. My fingers found the main disconnect handle, a heavy lever switch mounted on the panel's right side designed for emergency isolation. I gripped the insulated handle and threw it to the off position in one clean motion. The lights died instantly, relay switches cascading through the building systems as the world went black. Somewhere in the penthouse, 50 guests gasped in unison. Glass clinked. Someone laughed nervously. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, pale green LEDs mounted at ankle height, casting the corridor in sickly illumination. "Go," I said. We ran. The emergency exit door swung open. At my touch, no longer locked, exactly as code required. The stairwell stretched down into green-lit darkness, concrete steps and metal railings descending 32 floors. Our footsteps echoed in the shaft, my dress shoes, slapping rhythm, Leonie's heels clicking faster. Behind us, Sterling's voice drifted through the open penthouse door, not shouting, not panicked, just calm, conversational, terrifying in its control. "Leonie, baby, where are you? His footsteps followed, steady, methodical, purposeful, the sound of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. In absolute darkness, with 50 confused guests, and one methodical predator hunting us, my daughter put her hand in mine without hesitation. We descended faster, taking steps 2 at a time. My knee screamed protest, the old injury from a construction fall in 2009, but adrenaline pushed me through. Leonie kicked off her heels at the 20th floor landing, left them behind without breaking stride. Her stockinged feet whispered against concrete. "Leonie!" Sterling called from somewhere above, still calm, still patient. "This is silly. The emergency system will restore in 3 minutes. Just come back upstairs." The sound of his footsteps was worse than shouting, the steady, rhythmic stride of someone who knows exactly what he's doing. 10th floor, 5th floor, ground level. I slammed through the exit door, and we burst into October rain, cold and sudden against my face. The street was empty except for my truck, parked 2 blocks away in the public garage. We ran through puddles, water soaking through my dress shoes, Leonie's silk dress plastering against her legs. I fumbled with the keys. The truck unlocked with a chirp that sounded impossibly loud. We threw ourselves inside, and I cranked. The engine pulled out of the garage without checking mirrors, tires squealing on wet pavement. "Dad," Leonie's voice was shaking. "What exactly was in that note?" I didn't answer. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, watching the receding buildings, searching for... There! Sterling stood at the building entrance, rain soaking his designer suit. He didn't run after us or shout. He just pressed his phone to his ear, eyes tracking my truck as we cleared the block, standing perfectly still like a chess player who'd already calculated every move I thought I was choosing freely. I pulled the note from my pocket and handed it to Leonie. She unfolded it, read it twice, then looked at me with eyes that held too many questions. "The address on the back," she whispered. "That's your house." "I know. Who wrote this?" "I don't know." In the side mirror, I caught movement headlights pulling out of the garage behind us, maintaining distance but matching our turns. They'd been following since we left. The headlights followed us for 3 miles, before peeling off at the Mercer Island exit. Probably just coincidence. Probably just another late-night driver heading east. But my hands didn't stop shaking until we crossed into Bellevue and pulled into my driveway. The house I'd built with my own hands 28 years ago had witnessed every milestone of Leonie's life. But tonight, it would witness her learn that the man she married 3 weeks ago had legally chained her to a corpse. We sat in the truck for a moment, rain drumming on the roof, neither of us ready to move. Leonie still clutched the note, her silk dress ruined by October weather mascara smudged beneath her eyes. She looked like she had the night her mother died 5 years ago, standing in this same driveway, asking me how the world could be so randomly cruel. Except this wasn't random. "Come inside," I said. The house smelled like sawdust and coffee, the way it always did. I'd been refinishing the staircase banister, and white oak shavings still dusted the entryway floor. Leonie kicked off her soaked stockings and followed me to the kitchen, the oak table where we'd made every family decision since she was 6 years old. I turned on the overhead light, The single bulb cast harsh shadows across her face as she sat down and flattened the note on the scarred wood surface, reading it again like the words might have changed during our escape. "Dad," she said finally, "a catering worker is not a reliable source." "No," I agreed, "but your bank account is." She looked up at me, and I saw the moment the skepticism started cracking. She'd been defending Sterling in her head for the past 30 minutes, building arguments about misunderstandings and overreactions. But she was also my daughter, and she'd inherited my ability to recognize when a structure's foundation had shifted. "Open your laptop," I said. "Check your accounts." "Sterling handles our finances." He said it made sense since he works in investment management, and I'm still building my design portfolio. "Leonie?" She stopped. Her hand went to her purse, pulled out her phone. 14 missed calls from Sterling. She powered it down without listening to the voicemails, then retrieved her laptop from the bag she'd grabbed on our way out of the penthouse. The computer booted up with a soft chime that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet kitchen. Leonie's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and I watched her face cycle through emotions: doubt, fear, hope that I was wrong, terror that I was right. "What am I looking for?" she whispered. "Property records, King County Assessor's Office, public database." She typed the URL. The page loaded official, bureaucratic, undeniable. She entered Sterling Blackwell's name in the search field. There's a moment in every parent's life when you watch your child's innocence die in real time. This was mine. The results populated. Luxury penthouse at 1200 Stewart Street, downtown Seattle. Purchase price $2.8 million. Current mortgage is primary. Lien $1.5 million. Secondary lien $1.3 million against. Leonie clicked the secondary mortgage details. Her face completely lost its color before I could even read the text on the screen. "What is it?" I moved behind her chair, looked over her shoulder. The property, listed as collateral, wasn't the penthouse. It was a Bellevue residential address, 4400 block of Evergreen Point Road. Owner of record Rachel Voss. Status deceased. October 2022. The mortgage had been originated 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks before Leonie's wedding, and the name listed as primary liable party was Leonie Blackwell, born Mercer. "I never signed this," Leonie said. Her voice had gone flat the way voices do when the mind can't process what the eyes are seeing. "I never even heard of Rachel Voss until—" She stopped. Her hand went to her mouth. "Until what?" I asked. "Sterling mentioned her once, during our second date." Leonie's eyes stayed locked on the screen. "He said she was an old girlfriend who died in a car accident. He looked genuinely heartbroken when he said it. I thought it was sweet that he still mourned her." I leaned closer to the screen, reading the mortgage documents. The digital signature on the loan application was perfect. Leonie's name in her handwriting, complete with a little flourish she added to the capital L. "Notarized. Witnessed. Filed with King County 6 weeks ago while Leonie was visiting me for a weekend, helping me pick out tile for the bathroom renovation." "How did he—" Leonie's voice cracked. "I never signed anything. I never even saw these documents." "Digital forgery," I said quietly. "If he had access to other documents, you'd signed rental applications, job contracts, anything with your signature." "He photographed my passport," Leonie whispered. "Said it was for travel planning. Our honeymoon in Bali that we're supposed to take next month." The kitchen clock ticked. Rain pattered against the window. Somewhere in the house, the old furnace kicked on with a familiar groan. Leonie clicked back to the property ownership details. Rachel Voss, married to Sterling Blackwell, deceased October 2022. "Married," Leonie read aloud. "Not girlfriend, wife." "He never mentioned that part. He said girlfriend. He said accident." Her hands were shaking now, fingers hovering over the keyboard like she was afraid to touch it. "Dad, I'm legally responsible for a dead woman's $1 million debt. How is that possible?" "Because you married him," I said. "And in Washington State, anyone listed as a cosigner on a loan is fully liable for that debt, regardless of how the signature got there. If he forged your name on these documents as the primary liable party, then I'm liable." Leonie closed her eyes. "Even though I never signed anything. Even though I never knew Rachel Voss existed. Even though," I confirmed. She opened her eyes and looked at the screen again. Rachel Voss. Sterling had mentioned her exactly once during their courtship, an old flame who'd died tragically in a car accident 2 years ago. His eyes genuinely wet when he spoke her name. Except she wasn't an old flame. She was his wife, and somehow my daughter was now legally responsible for a dead woman's $1 million debt. The question hung in the air between us like smoke. If Sterling had spent 3 weeks systematically building a financial trap, what other documents had he prepared for the moment? The party guests finally left. Your shared cloud folders, I said. Check the directory labeled with his name. Leonie's hands were still shaking as she navigated to iCloud Drive. The interface loaded, showing a dozen folders, organized with the meticulous attention Sterling brought to everything he touched. Finance, travel, property, and one labeled simply Documents Sterling. She clicked it. Inside were 17 PDF files, each with clinical naming conventions. Estate_planning_draft _v3.pdf life_insurance _application_final dot a pdf medical _directives _wa _state dot pdf. The kind of documents wealthy people assemble to protect their assets and families. Except Leonie wasn't wealthy, and Sterling wasn't protecting her. Open the estate planning one, I said. The PDF loaded. 23 pages of legal language dense enough to require a law degree. I scanned the header Estate Planning Final Signature Set, prepared by Dalton and Associates Estate Law Specialists, dated 3 days after their wedding. I started reading aloud, my voice steady even as my chest tightened. Medical Power of Attorney under Washington State RCW 11.125, granting Sterling Cole Blackwell exclusive authority to make all healthcare decisions in the event the undersigned falls into persistent vegetative state or becomes medically incapacitated. Leonie leaned closer to the screen. That's standard, right? Spouses do that. I kept reading, including but not limited to unilateral authority to withdraw life support, discontinue feeding tubes, and allocate organs to designated medical facilities for transplant purposes. Allocate organs. Leonie's voice had gone hollow. I scrolled down. There it was, buried in section 4.2. In the event of brain death or persistent vegetative state, the undersigned grants irrevocable authority to Sterling Cole Blackwell to make all end-of-life medical decisions without independent consultation, including unilateral termination of life support and mechanical ventilation within 72 hours of any documented brain death determination without requirement for secondary physician review or family notification. That's not estate planning, Leonie whispered. She couldn't finish the sentence. Neither could I. There are documents that transfer money, documents that transfer property, and then there are documents that reduce your daughter's entire existence to an optimized liquidation timeline. I clicked back to the folder directory. What else is in here? Leonie's hand moved the cursor to life_insurance_application_final.pdf. The file opened, and the number at the top of the page hit like a physical blow. Policy death benefit $5 million. $5 million. Corporate life insurance. Opened 2 weeks after their wedding through Sterling's investment firm. Leonie Blackwell listed as insured party. Sterling Cole Blackwell listed as sole irrevocable beneficiary. The premium payment schedule showed monthly deductions of $847 automatically withdrawn from Leonie's checking account starting September 15th. I never authorized this, Leonie said. I never even saw this application. I scrolled through the document. The signature page showed Leonie's name in perfect script, identical to the mortgage forgery. Witnessed by 2 people I didn't recognize. Notarized by someone named M. Fletcher Mobile Notary Services. Then I saw the calendar entry embedded in the PDF metadata. My blood went cold. Event final document execution. Date Saturday, October 5th, 2024. Time 10:30 p.m. Location 1200 Stewart Street, Penthouse 32B. Attendees: M. Fletcher Mobile, Notary S. Blackwell, L. Blackwell. Notes: all guests departed by 10 p.m. Private signing session. Medical POA. Life insurance beneficiary. Confirmation asset transfer authorizations. Champagne service following execution. Tonight, Leonie read aloud, mobile notary scheduled for tonight after the guests left. The kitchen clock read 12:47 a.m. We'd escaped the penthouse at 8:38 p.m. The party would have ended around 10. Guests would have filtered out with polite goodbyes and promises to lunch soon. Sterling would have poured Leonie another glass of champagne, guided her to the study, and introduced her to M. Fletcher, who'd arrived with a leather portfolio full of documents requiring her signature. Her phone lit up on the table. Sterling, first call. We both stared at it. The screen glowed, vibrated twice, then went dark. 30 seconds later, it lit up again. Second call, third, fourth. Don't answer, I said. Leonie's hand hovered over the phone, then pulled back. He's going to keep calling. Let him. Fifth call, sixth, seventh. Each one lasting exactly 4 rings before rolling to voicemail. Sterling wasn't leaving messages. He was counting, documenting, building a pattern of attempted contact that would look good in whatever legal filing he was already drafting. 8th call, 9th, 10th. We escaped with maybe 5 minutes to spare, I said quietly. 5 minutes before he would have had you sign your own death warrant. Leonie's eyes stayed fixed on the screen. And then what? He takes out the life insurance stages an accident, and not an accident, I said. Medical emergency, something that puts you in the hospital. Persistent vegetative state. Brain injury, something that triggers the medical power of attorney and lets him make the call to withdraw support. But I'd be alive when he signed the documents. How would he? 11th call, 12th, 13th. The pieces assembled in my head with the horrible clarity of a blueprint I didn't want to read. Insurance policy executed tonight. Medical power of attorney giving Sterling legal authority to end life support. Organ allocation agreement, routing biological materials to a Turkish clinic that probably paid fees for American organs, and somewhere in Sterling's methodical planning, a way to ensure Leonie ended up in exactly the medical condition that would make it all legal. 14th call. Then nothing. We sat in silence watching the dark screen. 30 seconds passed. A minute. 2 minutes. The phone stayed quiet. He stopped at 14, I said. Leonie's voice was barely audible. Why does that matter? Because he's done panicking. He's planning. The house settled around us. Old wood creaking rain against the windows, the refrigerator humming its familiar rhythm. Normal sounds in a world that had stopped being normal the moment that waitress slipped me a warning note. Somewhere in Seattle, a man who'd spent 3 weeks building a perfect trap was recalculating every variable we'd just broken. I pulled the crumpled warning note from my pocket and flipped it to the address scrawled on the back. Whoever wrote this knew about the medical power of attorney before we did. That meant they'd been watching Sterling long enough to know his exact methodology. The address led to a dead-end street in Shoreline where someone had been watching Sterling Blackwell long enough to know exactly when his next victim would need saving. We're going, I said. Leonie looked at me with exhausted eyes. Dad, it's almost 1 a.m. We don't know who sent that note. No, but they knew about the notary. They knew the timeline, and they risked their job to warn us. She pulled on her coat without another word. The drive took 35 minutes through midnight rain, windshield wipers beating rhythm against silence. Shoreline sat north of Seattle proper, older neighborhoods established trees, the kind of streets where neighbors knew each other's cars. The address led us to a dead-end cul-de-sac where a single craftsman home sat isolated from its neighbors, separated by overgrown laurel hedges and a long gravel driveway. I killed the headlights and studied the property. Late-season roses struggling against October cold, cedar shingles weathered gray, and mounted beneath the eaves a commercial-grade security camera, the kind with infrared capability and multiple zones of coverage. The angle was professional, positioned to capture approach vectors most civilians never thought about. Someone's watching, I said. Good, Leonie whispered. I hope they're armed. We walked up the gravel path, our footsteps crunching loud in the quiet neighborhood. I was 10 feet from the porch when the light snapped on motion activated and blinding. The front door opened before I could knock. An elderly man stood in the doorway, 65, maybe older, with silver hair and a cardigan that looked like it came from a thrift store. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the doorframe, and his eyes carried the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been waiting too long for something that might never arrive. Except it had arrived. We had. Mr. Mercer, he said. His voice was soft-cultured, completely incongruous with the trembling hands. Leonie, please come in. Do you walk your daughter into a stranger's house at 1 a.m. because a note from a waitress told you to, or because every other option ends with her name on a death certificate? We went inside. The house smelled like old books and black coffee. Hardwood floors, worn rugs, furniture that had survived decades without ever being fashionable. Everything suggested a retired academic, living alone, keeping things tidy out of habit, rather than expectation of visitors. Except for the living room. The wall that should have held artwork or family photos was covered floor to ceiling, edge to edge in framed photographs of young women. Not artistic prints or vintage portraits, just ordinary snapshots of ordinary lives, hiking Mount Rainier, laughing at a dinner table, standing in a garden with dirt on their hands. Each photograph had a small brass label affixed to the bottom of the frame. I stepped closer to the nearest one. A woman in her late 20s, blonde hair, pulled back hiking gear, Mount Rainier's peak behind her left shoulder. The kind of photo that would sit on a desk or refrigerator, marking a good day worth remembering. The label read, Rachel Voss, married 8 months, October 2022. Jesus, Leonie whispered behind me. I moved to the next frame. A different woman, dark hair, sitting at an outdoor cafe with a latte and a book. The label, Sandra Pierce, married 6 months, May 2019. Another photo. A redhead in business casual, caught mid-laugh at what looked like an office party. Lily Ashford, married 11 months, December 2014. The wall held 17 photographs, not all labeled, but the 3 with brass plates formed a timeline that stretched across a decade. These are all, Leonie's voice cracked. He married all of them. The old man moved to stand beside us, his trembling hands clasped behind his back. 3 women, he said quietly. 10 years. Every single one ruled accidental. Each photograph was a life that trusted the wrong smile, signed the wrong documents, and never saw the accident coming. Rachel Voss died in a car accident, the old man continued. Single vehicle collision on Highway 18 late at night. Brake failure attributed to deferred maintenance. Sandra Pierce drowned in Lake Washington, fell from her kayak, hit her head on the gunnel, no witnesses. Lily Ashford had an allergic reaction to shellfish. At a restaurant Sterling chose, even though her medical records showed no prior allergies. How do you know all this? I asked. Because I've been documenting it. He gestured to the wall. Every marriage, every accident, every insurance payout. Sterling Blackwell is a serial killer who's never been arrested because he's very, very good at making murder look like bad luck. Leonie sank into a chair staring at the photographs. Why didn't you go to the police? I did. 3 times. They investigated. Found nothing actionable. Different jurisdictions, different circumstances, no pattern a prosecutor could prove. Sterling's methodology is perfect, varied enough to avoid pattern recognition, patient enough to avoid suspicion. But you knew, I said. You knew he was going to try it again with Leonie. The old man walked to a side table and poured black coffee from a carafe that had been waiting for us. His hands, I noticed with a jolt, were suddenly no longer trembling. The frailty had been a performance, and now it was over. He turned back to us, holding the coffee cup steady as a surgeon's hand. My name is Walter Hobbs, he said, and I've been waiting for this exact night for 2 years. The coffee didn't steam. It had been poured before we arrived, timed perfectly for this moment. The trembling hands had stopped the second the door closed, and that security camera outside wasn't positioned to watch for Sterling. It was positioned to document our arrival. You knew we'd come, I said slowly. You knew exactly when. Walter Hobbs smiled, and it was the saddest expression I'd ever seen on a human face. I sent the waitress. I knew the notary timeline. I've known Sterling's entire playbook for 2 years, Mr. Mercer. What I didn't know was whether you'd be smart enough to get your daughter out in time. He set down the coffee and gestured to the wall of faces. Rachel Voss was my daughter, he said. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rachel Voss was my daughter. Walter Hobbs stood before the wall of photographs, with hands that no longer trembled, and I understood that everything about him, the elderly frailty, the cardigan, the soft voice, had been carefully constructed performance. Walter moved to a desk in the corner and returned with a banker's box full of file folders. He cleared the coffee table with one sweep of his arm, set down the box, and began laying out documents with practiced precision. Marriage certificates, death certificates, probate filings, insurance claim forms, each document placed exactly parallel to the next like a prosecutor building a case. I understood that the wall of photographs wasn't a memorial. It was evidence. Rachel Voss, Walter said, tapping the first file. My daughter. Married Sterling Blackwell in February 2022. Dead by October of the same year. 8 months. He slid a death certificate across the table. Cause of death. Accidental, fall, blunt force trauma. Crystal Lakes Trail Overlook. Investigation closed, no suspicious circumstances. She loved hiking. Walter continued, his voice flat, with the particular calm of someone who'd exhausted their capacity for grief. Went every weekend. Sterling encouraged it, said she needed her independence, her own hobbies. The accident, Leonie started. Walter cut her off with a raised hand. Rachel wore a personal GPS tracker, one of those safety devices for solo hikers. It logged her location every 30 seconds. He pulled out a printed map with a red line tracing a familiar trail. The data shows she hiked to the overlook at 2:47 p.m., then stood completely stationary for exactly 3 minutes at the edge before the fall. 3 minutes, I said slowly. People don't stand motionless at cliff edges for 3 minutes before accidentally falling, Walter said. They stumble, they slip, they move. But Rachel stood perfectly still and then she dropped. Sterling had an airtight alibi. Coffee shop 4 miles away, paid with credit card at 2:52 p.m. Security camera footage showing him inside the entire window. Investigators verified it. Case closed. He laid out the second file. Sandra Pierce, married March 2019, died November 2019. Carbon monoxide poisoning in a Bellevue cottage she'd inherited from her grandmother. Faulty furnace, tragic accident, no foul play suspected. Sterling inherited the cottage, Walter said. Sold it 6 weeks later for $420,000. The furnace had been inspected and certified safe 2 months before her death. The third file, Lily Ashford, married July 2016, died April 2017. Prescription medication overdose, sleep aid mixed with alcohol. Coroner ruled accidental. Lily didn't drink, Walter said. Recovered alcoholic, 7 years sober. Every friend testified she wouldn't touch alcohol. But the toxicology showed 0.18 blood alcohol content and triple the recommended dose of sleeping pills. 3 women, 3 funerals, 3 fortunes, and every single investigator saw exactly what Sterling wanted them to see. Tragic accidents, grieving widower, perfectly legal inheritances. Every single case followed an identical cadence, Walter continued. 6 months of intense courtship, immediate marriage, complete title transfer within 3 weeks, fatal accident between 6 and 18 months later. Estate settles to grieving husband. No contested wills, no suspicious activity, no pattern for investigators to recognize because each death occurred in different jurisdictions using different methods. I did the math in my head. Total assets? Walter pulled out a spreadsheet columns and rows filled with clinical precision. Rachel $680,000, Sandra $420,000, Lily $390,000. Total assets stolen across 3 operations, $1.49 million. Leonie leaned forward, studying the spreadsheet. Then her face went completely white. Dad, she whispered. I followed her gaze to the bottom of the page. A new entry highlighted in yellow. Leonie Blackwell, born Mercer. Marriage date September 14th, 2024. Projected asset yield $5.2 million. Status phase 2 initiated. Her name was already typed on the spreadsheet, like a pre-written obituary. That's my name, Leonie said, barely breathing. I'm already on the list. Walter's steady hands pushed the document closer. You're not just the next victim, Leonie. You're his retirement fund. I stared at the numbers. $5.2 million. Life insurance policy, property equity investment accounts, inheritance from her mother. Sterling had spent 3 weeks cataloging every asset Leonie possessed, calculating their liquidation value down to the penny. The previous 3 operations netted $1.5 million total over 10 years, Walter said. But your projected value is 5 times larger than all of them combined. Sterling spent a decade building his methodology, perfecting his timing, learning what works. You're not practice. You're the capstone. Leonie stood abruptly, walked to the wall of faces, and pressed her palm against Rachel Voss's photograph. How long have you known? About Sterling's pattern, 2 years. Since I started investigating Rachel's death and found Sandra Pierce's probate records. Then Lily Ashford's insurance claim. The methodology was identical. 2 years, Leonie said quietly. You've known for 2 years and you didn't stop him. I tried. Filed police reports in 3 jurisdictions. Hired a private investigator. Contacted the FBI. No one would act on circumstantial evidence from a grieving father who couldn't accept his daughter's accidental death. Walter's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd beaten their head against bureaucratic walls until they bled. So I waited. I watched. I documented. And when Sterling started courting you, I knew I had one chance to catch him in the act. By using my daughter as bait, I said. Walter met my eyes without flinching. By giving you the tools to save her before it was too late. That waitress you met tonight, she's been embedded in Sterling's catering company for 4 months, tracking his event schedule. The note told you exactly when to run. And if we hadn't run, then Leonie would have signed those documents, and in 6 to 18 months, she'd be another photograph on my wall. I looked back at the spreadsheet. $5.2 million. Phase 2 initiated. My daughter reduced to a line item in a serial killer's profit ledger. But something bothered me about Walter's story. The GPS data, the insurance records, the timing of the waitress intervention. He had forensic details that no grieving father should possess, details that suggested he wasn't just observing Sterling's operation. He was part of the machine. How did you get the GPS data? I asked. Police investigators couldn't access Rachel's tracker. Privacy laws weren't requirements, but you have time-stamped coordinates down to the second. Walter met my eyes without flinching. Because someone inside the system gave it to me. If Sterling had murdered 3 women over 10 years without a single investigation connecting the deaths, someone inside the system had to be erasing the trail, and Walter Hobbs knew exactly who. He pulled a fresh stack of documents from the banker's box. Marriage licenses, death certificates, property deeds. He spread them across the coffee table in chronological order, and I saw what he wanted me to see before he said it. Every document bore the same official signature. Hazel Blackwell, Walter said, tapping the first marriage license. Deputy Director of the Seattle City Archives, 19 years tenure, master-level administrative access to the Legacy Electronic Records Network. I picked up Rachel Voss's death certificate. The processing stamp showed it had been filed and cleared in 18 hours, a turnaround that normally took weeks. Hazel Blackwell's signature sat at the bottom, neat and authoritative, certifying the document as official city record. Sandra Pierce's probate filing cleared in 5 days instead of the usual 6 months. Hazel Blackwell authorized signatory. Lily Ashford's estate transfer processed same day. Hazel Blackwell municipal seal. Within the Legacy Electronic Records Network, she holds master-level administrative access, Walter continued, capable of inserting, erasing, or backdating any physical file routing through her department. Marriage licenses get filed instantly. Death investigations close without red flags. Property transfers slide through probate like water. And she gets what in return? Leonie asked. 35%, Walter said. $490,000 across 3 operations. Cash transfers routed through shell accounts registered to her sister's estate trust. 19 years inside the municipal infrastructure, and Hazel Blackwell had turned government seals into instruments of theft. The institutions we trust to protect us, city archives, public records, official seals had been corrupted into weapons by a woman who spent 19 years perfecting the betrayal. Why would someone with a stable government pension risk everything for Sterling's operation? I asked. Walter's expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy if it wasn't so cold. Because Sterling isn't her business partner. He's her son. The words dropped like stones into still water. She's Sterling's mother, Walter continued. Hazel Blackwell, 60 years old. Silver hair, pulled severe, spent 19 years in the city archives, building access and credibility. She raised Sterling alone after his father died, but more than that, she engineered him. He pulled out a photograph from the bottom of the box. Not a memorial photo like the ones on the wall. This was surveillance footage, grainy and dated, showing a woman in professional attire standing at a desk covered in spreadsheets and documents. The timestamp read 2013. This is Hazel's home office, Walter said. Every single structural detail of how Sterling targets, isolates, and clears these women was mapped out on her desk. Victim profiles, asset valuation formulas, timeline optimization. She built the methodology, then taught it to her son, like other mothers teach piano lessons. Leonie stared at the photograph. His own mother is helping him murder women. She didn't just help him, I said quietly. She manufactured him. Walter nodded. Sterling learned at Hazel's table the same way I learned carpentry at my father's workbench. Except instead of joinery and measurements, Hazel taught asset liquidation and evidence suppression. By the time Sterling executed his first operation in 2014, he'd been training for a decade. The timeline assembled in my head. Lily Ashford, 2017. Sandra Pierce, 2019. Rachel Voss, 2022. Each operation more refined than the last, each payout larger, each investigation more efficiently buried. Mother and son running a decade-long murder enterprise with the precision of a family business. So we go to the FBI, Leonie said. Show them these documents, the signatures, the financial transfers, and they'll find nothing, Walter interrupted, because Hazel has master access. The moment an investigation opens, every digital record vanishes. Every physical file gets misfiled into storage boxes that won't surface for years. The woman has spent 19 years learning how to make evidence disappear. Walter's hand settled flat against his chest, and I knew what was coming before he said it. But Hazel isn't the chief architect, he said, his voice dropping into something colder and more calculating than the frail old man performance had ever suggested. His hand pressed flat against his chest. She's a piece on the board, a critical one, certainly. She provides the infrastructure, the bureaucratic cover, the documentary legitimacy. But she isn't the top of the pyramid. He paused, and in that pause I heard all the carefully constructed lies dissolving. I am. The words hung in the air like a confession and a threat. Leonie stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. You built the operation? Walter finished. Recruited Hazel when she was a junior clerk with access and ambition. Trained Sterling from age 15 on victim selection methodology. Designed the financial infrastructure that routes payouts through 17 shell corporations across 3 states. He gestured to the wall of photographs with something approaching pride. Rachel wasn't my daughter, he said. She was victim 3 in a 10-year operational timeline designed to net 8 figures before retirement. The GPS data, the insurance records, the forensic details. Police never found. I have them because I planted them. Every breadcrumb, every document, every carefully timed intervention. I looked at the photographs on the wall. Not a memorial, not evidence for justice. A trophy case. The waitress who warned us, I said slowly. You sent her. 4 months embedded in Sterling's catering company, yes. Tracking event schedules, monitoring victim interaction patterns, waiting for the precise moment to intervene. Why? Leonie's voice shook. If you run the operation, why pull the alarm? Why save me? Walter's smile was the saddest and most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Because Sterling violated operational protocol, he said. And when a piece on the board stops following the architect's design, it needs to be removed. The helpful stranger who'd warned us, documented everything and opened his door before we knocked, had just confessed to engineering the machine designed to kill my daughter. I need to think, I said, alone, for a minute. Walter nodded, the performance of understanding concern sliding back over his features. Of course, I'll brew fresh coffee. This is a great deal to process. He disappeared into the kitchen, and I heard water running, the click of the stove igniting. Leonie sat frozen on the couch, staring at the wall of photographs, like they might explain something if she looked long enough. I walked into the service corridor, the narrow hallway between kitchen and back door, where coats hung and shoes accumulated, the kind of utilitarian space every old house has usually overlooked, usually unremarkable, except Walter's corridor had oak flooring. 28 years of laying floors taught me to recognize when a seam was cut by settling and when it was cut by design, and the razor-thin line in Walter Hobbs's oak corridor was the latter, which meant he'd built this house to hide something. I knelt, running my fingers along the tongue and groove joints. Most people wouldn't notice the microscopic gap, the way one board sat a fraction of a millimeter higher than its neighbor. But I'd spent 3 decades building hidden compartments for clients who paid premium rates for invisible architecture. The seam was too precise, too clean-cut with intention, not time. Someone had built this house with secrets worth hiding. My fingers traced the baseboard, feeling for irregularities. There, a small catch mechanism disguised as a knot in the wood grain, positioned exactly where someone kneeling would naturally place their hand. 28 years of construction work, and before that other skills I'd spent 3 decades trying to forget. My fingers found the catch like muscle memory never dies. The hatch released with a pneumatic hiss. A section of flooring lifted on hidden hinges, revealing a cavity about 2 feet square and 8 inches deep. LED strips illuminated the interior, automatically casting cold white light on the contents. A commercial-grade fireproof lockbox. 6 official state seals from Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, the kind government officials use to certify documents as authentic, and a leather corporate binder embossed with gold lettering. I pulled out the binder. The leather was expensive, the kind that came from law firms and Fortune 500 boardrooms. I opened it to the first page. Crane Property Management International. Registered Delaware Corporation. Active branch offices. Seattle, Portland, Spokane, Boise. Principal Director Edward R. Crane. The next pages showed property holdings across 5 states. Residential addresses purchased through shell companies. Commercial real estate. warehouses, and a detailed ledger of financial transactions that trace back 15 years. There's a particular silence that comes when you realize the helpful stranger has been 3 moves ahead the entire time and you've just discovered the proof in your own hands. I flipped through more pages. Management fees, property transfers, rental income routed through layered corporate structures, and then near the back, a section labeled Operational Assets, with 3 familiar names, Rachel Voss, Sandra Pierce, Lily Ashford. Each name had an associated property address. Each property showed purchase dates that aligned with their marriages to Sterling. Each ledger entry tracked monthly payments, categorized as administrative overhead, 35% of the total asset yield, exactly matching the cut Walter claimed Hazel received. Except these payments weren't going to Hazel Blackwell. They were going to Edward R. Crane. The water stopped boiling. I looked up. Walter stood at the corridor entrance, 2 empty coffee mugs in his hands, watching me with the open hatch at my feet and the corporate binder in my lap. No surprise on his face, no panic, just calm observation like a chess player watching an opponent make the exact move he'd predicted 3 turns ago. When he spoke, the elderly tremor was completely gone. His voice came out deep, clear, perfectly steady. The voice of a man who'd spent decades commanding rooms and signing contracts. I wondered how long it would take a man of your background to spot that seam. Edward Crane, I said. You're not Walter Hobbs, you never were. He set down the coffee mugs on a side table and stepped fully into the corridor. The frail posture straightened. The trembling hands went perfectly steady. The performance dissolved like smoke, revealing something harder and more dangerous underneath. Walter Hobbs is a name on a utility bill, he said. Useful for opening doors, building sympathy, creating the appearance of a grieving father. But you're right. That performance has served its purpose. The compartment, I said. You left it accessible. You wanted me to find this. A master carpenter recognizes intentional architecture when he sees it, Edward said. And a man with your particular background recognizes a concealment mechanism within 30 seconds of entering a room. I built this house 20 years ago with multiple hidden compartments. That one was specifically designed to be discovered by someone with expertise in custom joinery and mechanical concealment. My chest tightened. How much do you know about my background? Enough. Edward moved closer, his eyes never leaving mine. Desmond Mercer, 58 years old. Licensed general contractor specializing in high-end residential construction, 28 years of legitimate business with an impeccable reputation. He paused, and before that 7 years working with the Blackwood crew under the name The Carpenter. Master safecracker, non-destructive entry specialist. Retired in 1994 when you met Evelyn and decided to go legitimate. No arrests, no convictions, no trail except for people in my industry who remember when the best lockman in the Pacific Northwest walked away clean. The floor felt like it was tilting beneath me. You've been watching me, I said. Since the moment Sterling started courting Leonie, Edward confirmed. You think I'd let a $5.2 million operation proceed without researching every variable? Your daughter wasn't the only asset I evaluated. I needed to know if her father would be an obstacle or a tool. A man of your background, Edward said, and the way he emphasized those 3 words made ice settle in my chest. Walter Hobbs had been a performance. Edward Crane was real. And somehow he knew things about my past I'd spent 30 years burying, which meant he hadn't just been watching Sterling. He'd been watching me. You've been watching me, I said again, the words tasting like ash. Researching my background, evaluating whether I'd be useful. Of course, Edward said simply. A $5.2 million operation requires due diligence on all variables, including the father. He gestured toward the living room. Leonie still sat frozen on the couch, but her eyes tracked us as we returned. Edward settled into the chair across from us with the casual authority of a CEO chairing a quarterly review. Edward Crane didn't waste time with threats or manipulation. He laid out his business proposition with the clinical precision of a CEO, explaining why a particular asset needed to be liquidated, and that asset was my son-in-law. Sterling committed a terminal breach of contract, Edward began. The operational charter governing our network is explicit. 40% of each liquidation's yield flows to me as coordination fee, network maintenance, and documentary services. Sterling has quietly engineered a plan to intercept 100% of the Leonie Mercer operation appraised at $5.2 million and permanently relocate to a non-extradition sanctuary in Portugal. He pulled a slim folder from inside his jacket and slid it across the coffee table. I opened it. Bank account details, property listings in Lisbon, airline reservations for November 15th, and a ledger showing Sterling had already begun moving assets offshore. 2.08 million, Edward said. That's my contractual share he's attempting to steal. But the theft itself is secondary. The real problem is precedent. If Sterling successfully executes an off-charter operation, my entire network's discipline collapses. Other assets start considering independent ventures. The structure I've spent 15 years building dissolves into chaos. Leonie found her voice raw and shaking. You're talking about my life like it's a quarterly earnings report, because that's precisely what it is, Edward replied without emotion. Sterling views you as 5.2 million in liquidatable capital. I view you as a breach of contract incident requiring remediation. Your father, he nodded toward me, views you as his daughter worth protecting at any cost. The mathematics are identical regardless of emotional framing. He was offering me justice wrapped in a business transaction, packaged so cleanly I almost didn't see the truth. I wasn't his partner, I was his bullet. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Edward leaned forward. I require Sterling eliminated, cleanly, deployed through an asset with an airtight legitimate grievance and zero structural connection to my payroll. A desperate father whose daughter was targeted for slaughter by a documented serial predator. That narrative survives any investigative scrutiny. You want me to kill him? I want you to deliver evidence to federal authorities that results in his permanent incarceration, Edward corrected. Life sentence, maximum security, zero possibility of operational continuation. Sterling ceases to be a network threat. Hazel loses her enforcement mechanism. The breach is contained. He reached into his other pocket and withdrew a small encrypted flash drive, setting it on the table between us like a chess piece. That device contains comprehensive federal-grade evidence on Sterling Cole Blackwell and Hazel Margaret Blackwell, forensic financial records, authenticated recordings, documentary proof of 3 murders spanning 10 years. Deliver this to the Bureau. Sterling enters a federal penitentiary for life. Hazel follows. Your daughter retains her life. I dissolve back into the corporate woodwork and cease all operations in the Pacific Northwest. Everybody gets what they want. The flash drive sat there small and black and impossibly heavy. And if I throw this back in your face, I asked. Edward's expression didn't change. Then Hazel issues her own operational directive within 24 hours. Sterling will be instructed to accelerate the Leonie timeline using emergency protocols. Medical emergency, staged accident, whatever methodology yields fastest liquidation, and Leonie becomes victim number 4 on that wall. He stood smoothing his cardigan like the elderly performance might return at any moment. I'm granting you 60 minutes to decide. I'll be on the rear deck. When I return, you'll either hand me back the drive or confirm you'll deliver it to federal authorities by sunrise. Edward walked toward the back door, leaving us alone with the flash drive and the wall of dead women. Leonie grabbed my hand. Dad, what do we... My phone vibrated on the table between us, unlisted number. I answered, yes. A woman's voice came through calm and measured. Mr. Mercer, I know exactly what house you are sitting in right now, and I know precisely what deal Edward Crane just laid on your table. My pulse spiked. Who is this? Someone who's been watching this operation a great deal longer than Edward has been watching you. Do not sign his deal. Do not deliver that flash drive to federal authorities. Edward Crane is not offering you justice. He's offering you a script that ends with you as his scapegoat. How did you get this number? The same way I got the commercial security footage showing Edward planting evidence in Hazel's office 6 months ago. The same way I obtained the offshore account. Transfers proving Edward took 65% of each operation, not 40. The same way I know Sterling isn't planning to flee to Portugal. Edward is. Leonie leaned closer, trying to hear. What do you want? I asked. To meet. There's a 24-hour diner in Rainier Valley called New Luck. Be there in 30 minutes. Come alone or bring your daughter, your choice. But do not tell Edward Crane you're leaving, and do not bring that flash drive. Why should I trust you over him? Because Edward saved 3 women's lives over the past 10 years, the woman said, and I'm one of them. He didn't do it out of mercy. He did it to build leverage. My name is Serene Voss. My sister was Rachel. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Serene Voss, Rachel's sister, the woman who should have been mourning at a funeral, but was instead calling from an unlisted number with information that contradicted everything Edward had just told us. The flash drive sat on the table. Edward stood on the rear deck, visible through the glass door, his back to us, phone to his ear, making his own calls. 59 minutes left on his deadline, and an anonymous woman who knew things she shouldn't, including exactly how many moves Edward was ahead. Whoever she was, she'd been watching the Watchers. "We're leaving," I told Leonie, pocketing my phone. Through the glass door, Edward still stood on the rear deck with his back to us, phone to his ear. "Now, before he turns around." We slipped out the front door into pre-dawn darkness and drove. The address led to a gravel lot diner in Rainier Valley, where the fluorescent lights buzzed over cracked vinyl booths, and the coffee had been brewing since midnight, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and survival came with scars you couldn't hide. New Luck Diner sat in an industrial corridor between a tire warehouse and a shuttered machine shop, its neon sign flickering red against the 4 a.m. darkness. The parking lot held 3 cars, staffed vehicles, probably given the hour. I pulled my truck into the far corner where I could watch both the entrance and the street. "We're 30 minutes into Edward's 60-minute deadline," Leonie said. "What happens when we don't come back? We find out if this woman knows something Edward doesn't." Inside the diner was empty except for a tired waitress, refilling salt shakers, and a cook visible through the kitchen window. The air smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. We chose a booth with clear sightlines to both doors, a habit I'd picked up in my pre-carpentry days and never quite lost. At 4:07 a.m. a woman entered. She moved with deliberate economy, scanning the room before her eyes settled on us. Mid-30s, wearing jeans and a high-collared sweater despite the diner's overheated interior. Her posture carried the particular wariness of someone who'd learned to navigate shadows and expect danger from familiar faces. She crossed directly to our booth and extended her hand. "My name is Vivica Voss." Rachel Voss was my biological sister. Leonie's breath caught. "Rachel, the mortgage, the first name on the spreadsheet." Vivica slid into the booth across from us, positioning herself back to wall, facing the exit. The waitress appeared with coffee we hadn't ordered, filled 3 mugs without asking, and disappeared without comment. "You're supposed to be dead," I said quietly. "On the phone you called yourself Serene." "Serene was the name Edward's people gave me when they relocated me 18 months ago," Vivica replied. "New identity, new documentation, new life purchased with 18 months of servitude. But my birth name is Vivica, and I'm done with aliases." The woman from the wall, the hiker on Mount Rainier, who stood stationary for 3 minutes before the fall, had a sister who moved like someone who'd learned to survive in shadows. "How did you know where we were?" Leonie asked. "How did you know what Edward offered?" "Because I've been tracking Edward Crane's operation for 18 months, Vivica said. "Every property, every shell company, every asset he owns or controls. That shoreline safe house has commercial-grade security cameras on every approach. I've had a directional microphone pointed at his living room window since he activated it 4 days ago. In the space of 3 hours, we'd met a crime boss, discovered a murder wall, and now sat across from a ghost. Except ghosts don't carry surgical scars and 18 months of calculated survival." "Why contact us now?" I asked. "Why not go to police with whatever you've collected?" "Because Edward owns pieces of 6 different law enforcement jurisdictions through compromised personnel and strategic documentation control," Vivica said. "Rachel's death certificate was processed in 18 hours with Hazel Blackwell's signature. My accident investigation was closed in 48, with conclusions written before forensics finished. If I walk into a police station with evidence, it disappears into the same bureaucratic black hole that swallowed 3 previous murders." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug like she was trying to absorb its heat. "After Rachel died in October 2022, I started investigating her banking history. Found the forged documents, the property transfers, the life insurance policy Sterling had opened 3 weeks into their marriage. I made the mistake of asking too many questions in public records offices that route requests through Hazel's department." Leonie leaned forward. "Sterling found out. 6 months later, I was heading eastbound on Highway 2 towards Stevens Pass, when my brake lines suffered catastrophic pressure loss. The vehicle left the roadway at 70 miles per hour, rolled 4 times, and caught fire." She pulled down her collar. The scar was white and thick, running from her jawline down her neck to disappear beneath her sweater. Surgical precision, but the kind that came from emergency reconstruction rather than planned procedure. The fluorescent lights cast it in harsh relief, a permanent testament to violence survived by millimeters. I survived solely because an extraction specialist pulled me out of that burning steel before I bled out. Vivica continued, her voice flat, with the particular calm of someone who'd relived the memory too many times. That specialist was on Edward Crane's payroll, dispatched specifically to save me, stabilize me, and relocate me before Sterling could verify the kill. Edward saved your life, I said slowly. Edward didn't preserve my life out of basic human charity, Vivica corrected. He kept me alive as absolute leverage against Sterling if he ever stepped off the reservation. A survivor he could produce at any moment to destroy Sterling's careful mythology of tragic accidents. I've owed him my life for 18 months. Every safe house, every identity document, every dollar that kept me hidden, all purchased on credit with Edward Crane holding the note. She pulled her collar back up, covering the scar. Tonight, I'm choosing who I actually settle that debt with, and it isn't Edward. The white scar caught the fluorescent light, like a brand jaw to collarbone precise and brutal, the price Edward Crane had extracted for pulling her from burning steel. For 18 months, she'd been his asset, his leverage, his insurance policy against Sterling. But tonight, in a gravel lot diner at 4 in the morning, she was choosing to become something Edward hadn't calculated free. Leonie's hand found mine across the table. What do you know about Edward's deal, the flash drive? Vivica's expression hardened into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so cold. I know that flash drive contains exactly the evidence Edward wants federal authorities to see, which means it's missing the evidence that implicates him. I know Sterling isn't planning to flee to Portugal, and I know Edward isn't offering you justice. She pulled a slim folder from inside her jacket and set it on the table between us. He's offering you a script that ends with you taking the fall for murders you didn't commit, while he vanishes with 15 years of profit and leaves you holding federal conspiracy charges. Open the folder, I said. Vivica spread the contents across the diner table. The first document was a photocopy of an adoption certificate yellowed with age dated 25 years ago. The header read, Oregon State Child Welfare Services. She pushed the scarred tissue beneath her collar and said that Hazel, born Margaret Crane before she took the Blackwell name through marriage, had hand-selected her son the way someone chooses breeding stock, 10 years old. Institutional walls, psychological assessments, filed in triplicate. Before she built her municipal career, before she became the architect of this operation, she had spent months engineering the perfect heir. In 1999, she walked into an Oregon State facility and selected a 10-year-old boy named Sterling Cole. Leonie leaned forward, studying the document. Selected, not adopted. The legal paperwork says adoption, Vivica replied. But these... She laid out 3 more pages. Psychological evaluation forms, intelligence assessments, behavioral observation notes. These tell a different story. The diner's fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed, casting strobing shadows across the adoption documents, spread on the table institutional letterhead child welfare stamps, Hazel's signature precise and unwavering beside a 10-year-old's photograph. I picked up the first evaluation. Cognitive assessment. Superior intelligence IQ estimated 138 to 145. Emotional profile demonstrates limited empathy. Response struggles with peer attachment formation. Recommendation. Requires structured environment with clear behavioral expectations. The second form, social worker, notes subject displays exceptional problem-solving abilities, but minimal emotional reciprocity. Adoptive placement should emphasize academic achievement over emotional bonding. The third, institutional psychologist summary, high-functioning child with marked attachment patterns, suitable for adoption by experienced parent, capable of managing emotionally reserved personality. She didn't find him through conventional adoption channels, Vivica said. Margaret Blackwell spent 6 months reviewing psychological profiles of institutionalized children across 3 states. She was looking for specific markers, high intelligence, emotional detachment, malleability. She found Sterling Cole in an unlisted Oregon facility and engineered the adoption through private channels that bypassed standard family placement protocols. She built him, Leonie whispered, like a business acquisition. Exactly like a business acquisition, Vivica confirmed. She selected raw materials, a brilliant, emotionally disconnected 10-year-old with no family ties, and spent the next 25 years shaping him into the precision instrument she needed. Every lesson about asset valuation, every technique for document manipulation, every methodology for making murder look accidental, she taught him the way other parents teach piano. I thought about Leonie, about the careful way I'd tried to raise her after Evelyn died, hoping I wasn't passing down my own darkness like some genetic curse. Wondering if every parent manufactures their children's psychology, if my daughter would inherit my failures, the way Sterling inherited Hazel's brutality, if legacy was always a form of poisoning. The coffee had gone cold. The cook scraped the griddle in the kitchen. Outside, dawn was starting to gray the edges of the industrial corridor. So Hazel created Sterling, I said, raised him to be a killer. And now what he's turned on Edward's operation. Not Edward's operation, Vivica said quietly. Hazel's. She pulled out another document. This one was recent. A medical laboratory report dated 3 weeks ago, stamped with a private diagnostics company logo I didn't recognize. Before I show you what that toxicology report revealed, are you still with me? Comment. A, if you think Hazel knows Sterling is killing her, or B, if she's completely blind to it, and tell me in one sentence why you chose that answer. Quick note, the next part includes recreated details to convey the investigation's findings, but the core pattern is what matters. I have a contact in private medical diagnostics, Vivica explained. Someone who owes me for keeping quiet about irregular sample handling 3 years ago. I asked them to run a comprehensive toxicology screen on blood samples from Hazel Blackwell's last physical examination. She slid the report across the laminate. Thallium, I read aloud. Chronic low-dose exposure. Estimated accumulation timeline 4 to 6 months. Symptoms consistent with ongoing poisoning, hair loss, peripheral, neuropathy, gastrointestinal distress. Leonie's hand covered her mouth. Sterling is poisoning her. Has been for months, Vivica confirmed. Thallium is nearly undetectable in standard medical screening. Symptoms mimic other conditions, stress, aging, autoimmune disorders. By the time conventional doctors recognize it, the damage is often irreversible. Sterling learned this methodology from somewhere, and I'd bet everything that Hazel taught it to him is one of the approved liquidation techniques. I scanned the rest of the report. Elevated thallium concentrations, tissue damage consistent with sustained exposure. Prognosis, poor if exposure continues. The dosing pattern, Vivica said, pointing to a chart at the bottom of the page, matches Sterling's overseas travel schedule. Every time he returns from international trips, Hazel's symptoms spike. He's bringing it back in his luggage, probably acquired through the same procurement networks Hazel taught him to access. She built a weapon, Leonie said, her voice hollow, and now the weapon is killing her with the exact techniques she programmed into him. The Blackwell dynasty, I said quietly, consuming itself. Vivica gathered the documents back into her folder with practiced efficiency. Hazel Blackwell spent 25 years engineering the perfect heir, brilliant, ruthless, completely loyal to the methodology she taught him. But she made one miscalculation. She assumed that loyalty meant obedience. She didn't account for the possibility that Sterling would apply everything she taught him and conclude that the architect herself was an obstacle to his optimization. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Coffee dregs cooled in chipped mugs. Somewhere in Seattle, a woman who'd built an empire on murder was dying from the same poison she'd taught her adopted son to use. 3 players, I said. Edward wants Sterling eliminated. Sterling is eliminating Hazel. Hazel built the machine that's destroying her. Vivica slid the toxicology report across the laminate and said we had 3 sharks swimming in the same tank already bleeding, and when sharks smell blood, they don't distinguish between enemy and kin. So what do? Leonie asked. Let them tear each other apart while we hide. No, Vivica said, pulling out her phone. We give the federal government a front row seat and make sure all 3 predators end up in the same cage at the same time. She dialed. The call connected on the second ring. Vivica's phone call lasted 47 seconds, and when she set it down, the federal government was holding warrants with blank signature lines, waiting for live predators to step into frame. Done, Vivica said. My contact at the Bureau has been tracking the Blackwell Crane network for 8 months. The man you know as Edward Crane, his real name is Vincent. Vincent Edward Crane. Edward is just another alias like Walter Hobbs before it. They've had warrants, drafted evidence, compiled prosecutorial strategy mapped, but they've been missing the one thing federal courts actually require. Real-time actionable evidence, I said. The indictments are drafted and sealed, ready to be unsealed, the moment we give the signal. Vivica confirmed. They need live confession or attempted murder, something a jury watches happen in real time, something that can't be explained away by clever attorneys or suppressed through Hazel's municipal connections. They need theater, and they need it documented so thoroughly that no judge in the country can dismiss it as circumstantial. The FBI hadn't been helping us. They'd been waiting for someone desperate enough to build their case for them. Vivica's contact wasn't offering assistance. They were offering a collaboration where I became the federal government's hunting dog. But if it kept Leonie alive, I'd wear the collar. How do we give them that? Leonie asked. I thought about the penthouse, the smart home system Sterling had demonstrated with such pride, the cameras he'd installed in every room when he started losing trust in Hazel, never imagining they'd be turned against him. Hazel's penthouse has cameras in every room, I said. Installed when she started losing trust, Sterling showed them off during the party like they were security features. We turned her paranoia into a broadcast booth. Vivica leaned forward. You want to live stream a federal sting operation? I want to force all three of them into one room and make sure everything they say is documented by witnesses they can't threaten or bribe. Sterling's penthouse, Hazel's cameras, federal warrants waiting for the moment they incriminate themselves on camera. Leonie's fingers drummed on the table, and I recognized the pattern she was running, technical calculations in her head, the way she used to work through design problems at her architecture firm. Encrypted stream to multiple mirrors, she said finally. IP masked distribution through proxy servers. We broadcast to federal monitoring, but we also push it to platforms they can't shut down fast enough. They can't kill what they can't find. 3 venomous snakes in a canvas bag, and I was about to cinch the drawstring and shake it until the federal government heard the rattling. The logistics, Vivica said. How do you get all 3 of them in the same room at the same time without tipping them off? I spread my hands on the table, visualizing the board. We bait each one with exactly what they want most. Sterling gets proof of Hazel's institutional engineering, the adoption documents showing he was selected like breeding stock. That breaks his last illusion about maternal love and gives him justification to accelerate her elimination. Hazel gets evidence of Sterling's thallium poisoning, Leonie added, catching my thread. Proof that her engineered heir is systematically murdering her, that forces her hand to either eliminate Sterling or die. And Vincent, I continued, gets both Blackwells vulnerable in one location fighting each other instead of coordinating against him. He thinks he's walking into the perfect moment to clean house and consolidate his network. Vivica's smile was cold and precise. Vincent wants the Blackwells broken. Sterling wants his freedom from Hazel. Hazel wants her empire intact. We offer each one exactly that, and they walk into the same kill box. But they'll have security, Leonie said. Exit strategies, ways to disappear if it goes wrong. That's where my people come in, Vivica replied. I've been building a network for 18 months. People who owe me, people who owe Edward and want out, people who've been waiting for a chance to burn this operation down. My people will hold the perimeter, Rainier Valley to South Seattle, every exit covered until federal boots hit ground. Leonie's hand found mine across the table. Steady pressure, no tremor, the silent communication that said she understood the risk and chose it anyway. When do we spring it? She asked. I checked my phone. 3:47 a.m. Edward's 60-minute deadline had expired 23 minutes ago. He'd be mobilizing, trying to locate us, recalculating his variables. Tonight? I said. We need to move before Edward realizes we're not coming back to his safe house. Before Sterling completes whatever acceleration protocol Hazel might trigger. Before Hazel's thallium poisoning progresses beyond the point where she can function. Tonight gives us 12 hours, Vivica said. 12 hours to set up the technical infrastructure position, my people coordinate with federal monitoring, and craft the invitations that bring all 3 predators to the same location. I thought about what we were planning, using Leonie as bait, broadcasting a confrontation that could turn violent, trusting federal agents to arrive before bullets started flying. But I also thought about the alternative Edward's flash drive, designed to frame me, Sterling's medical power of attorney, waiting to execute Leonie Hazel's municipal corruption machine, ready to bury evidence. The trap wasn't just for Vincent and the Blackwells. By orchestrating a federal live stream operation, I was engineering Leonie's permanent safety, making her the documented victim witness the government would have to protect. Turning my daughter into untouchable evidence that proved the entire conspiracy. If she testified against 3 serial predators, on camera with federal agents as witnesses and millions of viewers, as backup, she became too valuable to eliminate and too visible to disappear. 12 hours, I confirmed. Vivica, coordinate with your federal contact. Get the exact warrant language, the triggering conditions, the backup protocols. Leonie, you'll handle the technical setup, camera access, stream distribution, security architecture. I'll craft the invitations. Vivica pushed back from the table and said she'd position her people by dawn, Federal standing by for the call. I felt the trap's teeth click shut in my mind, every asset moving into position, every predator about to receive an invitation they couldn't refuse. The hunt was reversing. We left the diner at 5:52 a.m. Vivica, heading south to coordinate her network while Leonie and I drove north through empty Seattle streets. But first we had to get home and prepare. The phone rang through my truck's encrypted system at 6:02 a.m. and the caller ID said, Blackwell Hazel. The prey was calling the hunter, which meant everything had already changed. I glanced at Leonie. She nodded. I answered on speaker. Mr. Mercer? Hazel Blackwell's voice came through clear and controlled the tone of someone who'd spent decades commanding rooms. I believe we should talk. About what? About the fact that you accessed my security server at 3:47 a.m. this morning. I spent the next 2 hours verifying exactly who you were and what you found before deciding you were more useful as an ally than a loose end. Sloppy digital footprint, Mr. Mercer. But I appreciate the confirmation that someone else finally sees what Sterling is doing. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She'd been watching, tracking, calculating. You've known since before dawn, I said. I've known since the moment you bypassed the first authentication layer, Hazel replied. The question I've been asking myself for the past 2 hours is whether you're a threat I need to eliminate or an asset I should recruit. I've decided on the latter. Leonie's eyes went wide. The woman who'd engineered 3 murders was offering an alliance. Why would I work with you? I asked. Because Sterling is systematically poisoning me with thallium, and you're the first person outside our operation who's figured it out. Because you have access to technical skills I need and motivation I can leverage. Because your daughter is Sterling's current target, which means we share a common enemy. You're offering to testify against your own son. I'm offering to survive the weapon I built, Hazel corrected. Sterling learned too well. He's applying every methodology I taught him, and now I'm the target. I have recordings of every call he made to procurement channels in Prague and Singapore, audio documentation of his thallium acquisition, shipping logistics, dosage calculations, everything federal prosecutors would need to put him away for life. 2 poisoners negotiating antidote terms, while the 3rd poisoner sharpened needles in another room. This was the Blackwell family business, distilled to pure transaction. In exchange for what? I asked her. Corporate immunity, federal witness protection, and your guarantee that when this operation concludes, Sterling ends up in a maximum security facility while I disappear into a comfortable retirement under a new identity. I pulled the truck onto the shoulder and killed the engine. This changed everything. If Hazel walked into our trap willingly carrying evidence against Sterling, we wouldn't need to manufacture the convergence she'd created herself. When can you deliver the recordings? I asked. Tonight. I'll bring everything to my penthouse. The original audio files, procurement documentation, toxicology projections, everything your federal contacts need to build an airtight case. Why your penthouse? Because Sterling has keys, access codes, and a sense of ownership. If you want him to walk into a trap, make it a location where he believes he holds territorial advantage. He'll come if he thinks he's consolidating power. She was right. And she was handing us the second half of our trap before we'd even finished designing it. I'll be in touch, I said and ended the call. Leonie stared at the dashboard. She just volunteered to be the bait. She's dying, I said. The thallium is killing her slowly, and she knows it. This is her exit strategy. Trade Sterling for immunity and disappear before the poison finishes the job. So we have Hazel bringing evidence against Sterling. Now we just need Sterling to show up. I looked at Leonie's phone in her lap. The device Sterling had been calling obsessively since we fled the penthouse party. The connection he believed gave him power over her. Hazel just gave us half the trap, I said. Now we need Sterling to walk in believing he's won. He needs to think you're coming back to him. Leonie's expression went very still. Dad, he needs to think you're surrendering, apologizing, returning to the penthouse voluntarily. He'll know it's fake, she said, but her voice carried no conviction. Not if you use the exact words he wants to hear. The apology, the surrender, the return. Predators believe their own mythology. Sterling has spent 3 weeks programming you to feel guilty, responsible, compliant. If you send him the message he's been waiting for, he'll see it as confirmation that his engineering worked. Leonie's fingers hovered over the phone screen, and I saw my daughter choose to become the weapon instead of remaining the wound. What do I say? I thought about Sterling's careful manipulation. The way he'd isolated her, controlled her environment, made her doubt her own judgment. The psychological architecture he'd built to make her feel like she owed him something. Keep it simple. 3 sentences. I'm sorry. I love you. I'm coming back. That's it. That's everything he wants. The apology validates that you were wrong to leave. The love confirms his power over you. The return signals complete surrender. He won't question it because it's exactly what he engineered you to say. Leonie opened her messages. Sterling's name sat at the top 47 unanswered texts since we left the penthouse, escalating from concern to anger to threats to pleading. When I send this, she said quietly, he's going to think he won, that I broke, that all his manipulation worked, until he walks into that penthouse tonight and realizes he's the one who's broken. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. What time should I say I'm coming? Don't specify. Let him set the meeting. Let him think he's in control of the timing. When he responds, we'll coordinate with Hazel to ensure they both arrive within minutes of each other. Leonie typed slowly, each word a calculated sacrifice. I'm sorry. I love you. I'm coming back. She showed me the screen. 3 lies that would read as truth to a man who believed he owned her. Send it, I said. Leonie's thumb hit send, and the message disappeared into encrypted space. Somewhere in Seattle, Sterling Blackwell's phone would light up with the exact surrender he'd engineered her to deliver. The bait was in the water, and all 3 sharks were swimming toward the same blood. Sterling's reply came through 67 seconds after Leonie sent the surrender message. 3 words tonight, 8 p.m., alone. The bait had worked. Now we had 11 hours to build the cage. The server room at 1200 Stewart Street was 17 degrees Fahrenheit colder than the residential floors above, and my 2019 contractor badge still opened the biometric lock like a key left under the mat. We'd entered through the service entrance at 9:14 a.m. carrying toolboxes and wearing contractor vests I'd pulled from my garage. The Sunday security guard barely glanced up from his phone as we signed the access log with fake company names and headed for the basement-level mechanical rooms. The server room hummed with the white noise of climate control and fiber optic infrastructure. Racks of equipment lined the walls, managing building systems for the luxury high-rise HVAC security cameras, network distribution, everything routed through centralized control, including every camera in Hazel Blackwell's penthouse. Here, I said, tracing fiber lines to a junction box. Every camera in Hazel's penthouse feeds through this junction. We're turning her security system into a broadcast studio with 3,000 mandatory subscribers. Leonie pulled out her laptop and started mapping the network architecture. The building uses a legacy Siemens system for AV distribution, corporate conference, streaming lobby, displays emergency broadcasts. If we patch into the master distribution node, we can push to every residential screen simultaneously. Plus external platforms, I added. YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, multiple mirrors so they can't shut it down fast enough. My 2019 contractor credentials had never been revoked because the building management company was absorbed into Blackwell Corporate Holdings 3 years ago. Sterling had unknowingly given me the keys to his own surveillance infrastructure through routine business acquisition. We worked in silence for the first hour, me running physical patches while Leonie built the software architecture. The technical trap was elegant in its simplicity. When I hit the trigger, every camera feed from the penthouse would route through our distribution node and broadcast simultaneously to building residents and streaming platforms. No kill switch, no central point of failure, just distributed evidence flooding into thousands of devices faster than any legal team could contain. Leonie's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her jaw tightened. Sterling, I asked. 7th message since this morning. She showed me the screen. He wants to know when I'm arriving, what I'm wearing, whether I've told you. He's already scripting the reconciliation. Each message was evidence possessive. Control, psychological manipulation, the entitled belief that she would perform exactly as he'd programmed her. Let him script, I said. When he walks into that penthouse tonight, every word becomes federal evidence with 3,000 witnesses. By 3 p.m., we had the infrastructure mapped. By 5 p.m., the encryption was routing through proxy servers across 3 continents. By 7 p.m., the automated distribution was testing clean. One trigger would push penthouse camera feeds to every screen in the building, plus external platforms with 0 manual intervention. The technical trap was armed and invisible. At 7:30 p.m., Leonie sent Sterling her final message, "On my way. See you at 8." His response was immediate. I knew you'd come back. I'll have champagne waiting. We sat in the cold server room, surrounded by humming equipment and fiber optic cables, carrying the infrastructure that would either save Leonie's life or document her final moments. Vivica confirmed Hazel's in transit, I said, checking my phone. She'll arrive at the penthouse around 8:15 p.m. with her evidence package. Vincent's people track Sterling's phone. He's been at the penthouse since 6 p.m. setting up. And Vincent himself? Vivica says he's positioning to arrive around 8:20 p.m. He thinks he's walking into a power consolidation meeting. Hazel and Sterling, vulnerable evidence of their civil war, perfect moment to clean house. So I go in first at 8 p.m., Leonie said quietly, alone with Sterling for 15 minutes. Maximum. Vivica's people have the timing coordinated. Hazel arrives, then Vincent. Once all three are in frame, I trigger the broadcast from down here. How many daughters had been asked to walk back into their own nightmares, carrying nothing but a wire and their father's promise that this time, the monster would be caged. At 7:40 p.m., we left the server room and took the service elevator to the 32nd floor. The corridor outside Hazel's penthouse was empty, expensive, and silent. You'll go up first alone, I said. Sterling needs to believe you came back to him willingly, that I don't know where you are. Play the broken wife returning to her husband. Apologize. Let him talk. Keep him engaged. How long do I have to play broken before the others arrive? 15 minutes maximum. Vivica's people have Hazel in transit. Vincent's tracking Sterling's phone. When all three converge, the stream goes live and Federal moves. FBI is positioned in vehicles 2 blocks out, waiting for the signal. Leonie looked at the penthouse door like it was the entrance to a cage. What if he gets violent before they arrive? Then you run. The cameras will capture everything. But Sterling thinks you're surrendering. Predators don't attack prey that's already submitted. He'll want to savor it, control it, make you perform the reconciliation he's been scripting. And the 3,000 residents watching this won't just document it for federal authorities, I said. The broadcast will stream live to every apartment in this building. 3,000 witnesses who can't be threatened or bribed. Evidence that no amount of Blackwell money or legal pressure can suppress or seal. Sterling will be explaining this on camera to neighbors, colleagues, everyone he's built his reputation around. Leonie's hand found mine. Dad, if this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, if Sterling figures it out before the others arrive, if the technical systems fail, if Federal doesn't move fast enough. She met my eyes. I need you to know I chose this. Not because you asked, because it's the only way to make sure he never touches another woman the way he touched me. My hand rested on Leonie's shoulder in the fluorescent corridor outside the server room, and I said the words that would send her up 32 floors alone. Time to ascend. Remember, you're a broken wife returning to her husband, not a federal witness walking into evidence collection. The elevator doors reflected her face transformed into surrender, eyes downcast, shoulders curved inward, the physical performance of defeat. Sterling was already waiting in the penthouse. I watched Leonie step into the elevator and press myself against the wall out of sight. The doors closed. She was alone now, ascending 32 floors to a penthouse where Sterling waited with champagne and carefully scripted reconciliation. I took the service stairs down to the server room, my phone showing the camera feeds I'd routed through Leonie's encrypted connection. 6 angles of the penthouse, all streaming to the laptop waiting on the equipment rack. Vincent Crane arrived 12 minutes early at 7:48 p.m., which meant he wanted to control the theater before the other actors took their marks. I watched him step off the elevator into the penthouse foyer, scanning the space with the practiced efficiency of someone conducting reconnaissance. He moved to position himself near the floor-to-ceiling windows, strategic sightlines covering both the entrance and the main living area. His hand brushed the underside of a side table as he passed, and I realized with cold clarity that he was checking a listening device he'd planted days ago. Vincent had been monitoring this penthouse long before tonight. He'd orchestrated his timing to maximize strategic advantage, believing he controlled the entire convergence. What he didn't know was that every device he'd planted was now feeding into my infrastructure, his surveillance becoming my evidence. Sterling stood near the kitchen island, 2 champagne flutes already poured. On the camera feed, Leonie sat on the couch in the exact posture we'd rehearsed. Shoulders curved inward, eyes downcast, the physical performance of defeat. Sterling's hand rested on her shoulder with possessive affection that made my jaw clench. Interesting that we all received invitations to the same family reunion, Vincent said, his voice carrying that particular warmth wealthy predators use when confronting rivals. Though I don't recall Sterling mentioning he'd invited his mother to witness his marital reconciliation. Sterling's expression flickered surprise, then calculation. I didn't send invitations, Crane. Leonie came back on her own, and you're trespassing in private property. Actually, a woman's voice came from the entrance. This penthouse is corporate holding, registered to Blackwell International, which makes it my property, Sterling. Hazel Blackwell entered at exactly 8 p.m., 60 years old, and moving with the controlled precision of someone who'd spent decades commanding bureaucratic machinery. She wore a tailored suit and carried a slim leather document folder, evidence against her own son packaged for federal delivery. And I invited Mr. Crane, Hazel continued, because we have mutual interests regarding your recent procurement activities. The three predators formed an unstable triangle on the marble floor, Sterling near the kitchen, Vincent by the windows, Hazel at the entrance, each positioned for optimal tactical advantage, each convinced they'd orchestrated this convergence, none aware that 6 cameras were streaming every angle to my server room, routing through encryption to federal monitors and building residents simultaneously. 3 sharks swimming in decreasing circles, each one bleeding from wounds, the others inflicted, none noticing the tank walls closing in or the spectators pressing against the glass. This is quite the coincidence, Sterling said, his hand tightening on Leonie's shoulder. My wife returns home, my mother makes a surprise visit, and my mother's business associate drops by for a chat. There are no coincidences in our line of work, Vincent replied. Only engineered outcomes, and people too slow to recognize them. Hazel moved deeper into the penthouse, setting her document folder on the dining table with deliberate precision. Let's dispense with theater. Sterling, I have recordings of your Prague calls. Thallium procurement isn't covered by attorney-client privilege, and federal prosecutors are remarkably interested in slow-acting poisons used against elderly parents. Sterling's facade cracked. And I have your institutional selection files, Mother. Engineering a child from orphan assessments plays poorly in probate court when you're dying of mysterious poisoning. Every psychological evaluation you reviewed, every marker you selected for, every calculated decision that turned adoption into manufacturing. Vincent's smile was cold and precise, touching family honesty. But you're both exposed on $1.49 million in financial fraud that traces directly to my daughter's assets. I'd suggest cooperation over mutual destruction. The room went very still. Leonie sat frozen on the couch, playing her role perfectly, the terrified wife caught in the middle of predators, revealing their true natures. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her right hand rested on her thigh, where her phone waited for my signal. Leonie's phone vibrated once against her thigh, my signal, from 32 floors below, the single buzz that meant every camera was recording, every stream was armed, and her performance had served its purpose. Let me propose an alternative, Hazel said, opening her document folder. Sterling goes to prison for attempted murder. I provide testimony in exchange for immunity and relocation. Vincent dissolves his network and retires with his existing assets intact. Everyone survives. Except me, Sterling said quietly. In your proposal, Mother, I'm the only casualty. You poisoned me, Hazel replied without emotion. You applied every methodology I taught you and concluded that eliminating your architect was optimal strategy. I'm simply returning the professional courtesy. Vincent moved closer to the center of the room. I have a counter-proposal. Sterling and Hazel both enter federal custody. I testify against the Blackwell operation in exchange for immunity. My network remains intact and I retire with full operational control. Remarkable, Sterling said. 3 separate plans, each one requiring the other 2 to accept federal prosecution while the architect walks free. He looked at Leonie for the first time since the others arrived. What do you think, sweetheart? Which one of these predators should I trust? Leonie met his eyes and said exactly what we'd rehearsed. I think you're all going to prison. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. At 8:04 p.m., Leonie felt the phone buzz against her leg and met the camera lens we'd memorized during setup, the one hidden in the smoke detector above the dining table, the one I was watching from 32 floors below. My finger hovered over the broadcast trigger. Now the moment when predators became evidence, when private confession became public record, when the trap's teeth finally closed. 3,000 screens were about to light up with live federal prosecution. At 8:05 PM, I tapped the broadcast trigger, and 3,000 screens lit up simultaneously across 12 federal offices, 6 newsrooms, and the secure viewing room where Vivica had assembled her coalition. The feed showed 3 people in Leonie's penthouse: Sterling Cole Blackwell near the windows, Vincent Crane pacing the dining area, Hazel Blackwell standing rigid by the entrance, and the viewer count climbed from 3,000 to 4,200 in the first 15 seconds. I'd built the system for exactly this: encrypted primary stream to federal endpoints, secondary mirror to verified journalists with embargo instructions, tertiary backup routing through servers in 3 countries. No single point of failure, no way to stop the signal once it started. The counter hit 7,800 viewers. Somewhere in those initial 90 seconds, the embargo broke. I saw the spike pattern that meant someone had pushed the feed to social media, probably one of the advocacy groups Vivica had briefed. By the time the viewer count reached 18,000, I'd stopped watching the numbers and focused on the 3 faces filling my monitor. On my monitor, Sterling Blackwell looked calm, almost bored. Hazel kept glancing at the door like she still had an exit strategy. Vincent dominated the center of the room with the territorial confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for anything. I triggered the audio overlay we'd prepared, my voice distorted through 3 layers of modulation to strip identifying characteristics but keep the clarity, came through every speaker in that penthouse. Vincent Ellison Crane, Sterling Cole Blackwell, you are being recorded and broadcast to federal prosecutors, the FBI Financial Crimes Division, and 18,412 live viewers. Vincent's head snapped toward the nearest speaker. The following individuals suffered measurable harm from your financial manipulation between January 2022 and October 2024. I read the first 10 names from the list Hazel had compiled. Real people with real losses. The kind of victims who never got airtime because their ruin was too technical to make good television. Marion Fletcher, $127,000. Robert and Susan Calloway, $340,000. David Okonkwo, $89,000. The amount scrolled across the bottom third of the screen while I spoke, each one representing a retirement destroyed, or a college fund emptied, or a small business collapsed. Vincent was staring directly at the camera now, the one hidden in the smoke detector, and I saw the exact moment he decided this was still performable. He thought he could talk his way through a live stream the same way he talked through depositions. "You want a confession?" Vincent's voice carried that boardroom certainty, the assumption that charm and volume could reshape reality. "Fine, I'll give you one. Yes, I structured those transactions. Yes, I used algorithmic trading patterns that retail investors couldn't detect. And yes, every single move was legal under current securities law." He walked toward the camera, filling the frame with his perfect teeth and his $4,000 suit. "You're upset because I played the game better than anyone else. Because I saw opportunities where you saw risk, because I acted while you hesitated, because I won and you lost." The viewer count hit 31,000. I watched the secondary monitors showing the federal viewing room prosecutors leaning forward, fingers already moving on tablets to flag specific timestamps. Vincent was giving them everything they needed, wrapped in the arrogance that would make a jury hate him. He kept talking, cataloging his tactics like he was teaching a masterclass. Market manipulation, front-running, insider coordination. Every sentence, another charge, another piece of evidence that couldn't be unsealed or suppressed, or plea bargained into nothing because 18 million people were about to watch it. Sterling moved then subtle shift toward the hallway. I triggered the second audio cue, the one that would keep everyone exactly where we needed them. Sterling Cole Blackwell records show you purchased 340 milligrams of thallium sulfate through a chemical supply company in April 2023. Toxicology reports confirmed the presence of thallium in tissue samples from Hazel Blackwell, consistent with chronic low-dose poisoning over 18 months. Hazel made a sound, half gasp, half sob. Sterling's expression didn't change. That was the thing about psychopaths in my experience. You could present them with perfect evidence of their worst crime, and they'd just recalculate their next move without wasting energy on denial or remorse. The viewer count was at 44,000, now the curve going exponential as clips got shared and reshared across every platform. Then the penthouse door opened and Vivica Voss walked in. She looked different from the professional photos I'd found during research. Thinner, older, with a surgical scar visible along her jawline, but she moved with the specific authority of someone who'd been dead and decided to come back. She was wearing a wire. I could see the slight bulk under her jacket, and she had a federal badge clipped to her belt next to a visible ankle holster. Sterling saw her and froze. Not fear exactly, more like a computer trying to process an input that shouldn't exist. "Hello, Sterling," Vivica said. Her voice was hoarse, damaged, probably from the trauma of being strangled and left for dead. "I'm the woman you murdered 18 months ago in the Grandview Marina parking garage. Except I survived. And I've spent every day since then building the case that's going to put you on death row." The viewer count hit 52,000. Vincent was staring at the monitors now, finally understanding that this wasn't a deposition or a negotiation, that millions of people were watching him realize his empire was ending in real time. He lunged for the network equipment mounted on the wall, the router, the cables, anything that might kill the signal. At the same moment, Sterling's hand went to his jacket pocket, the movement fast and specific, reaching for something that wasn't a phone. I hit the panic trigger and every federal team got the same two-word alert: weapons drawn. Sterling's hand was halfway to his jacket pocket when the main door exploded inward at 8:16 p.m. with hydraulic ram force that sent Italian hinges skittering across marble. The first person through the breach was the weathered waitress from Hazel's anniversary party. Gray hair, thick-soled shoes, the invisible woman who'd served champagne while predators plotted, now wearing an FBI windbreaker with federal gold clipped to her belt weapon, drawn voice cutting through chaos, with authority that had nothing to do with hospitality work. Federal agents' hands visible down on the ground now. Behind her came 6 more agents in coordinated breach formation, securing sightlines and exits with practiced efficiency. Sterling froze mid-reach. Vincent stumbled backward into the dining table, wine glasses shattering. Hazel raised her hands slowly, already calculating legal angles. The service entrance burst open simultaneously with another tactical stack, boxing everyone into the center with no escape vectors. The waitress stepped forward and met Sterling's eyes with recognition that went both ways. "Special Agent Celeste Hampton, FBI Financial Crimes Division." She held up her badge, weapon still trained. 18 months, embedded in Blackwell corporate events as catering staff, documenting conspiracy and fraud, while you discussed federal crimes over champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Sterling's corporate mask shattered. He'd been manipulated by someone he'd dismissed as background noise, someone whose name he'd never bothered to learn, someone who'd served him drinks while he planned murders. "Sterling Cole Blackwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder exploitation, wire fraud, and RICO violations." Celeste's voice carried 18 months of embedded surveillance. "Vincent Ellison Crane, you're under arrest for securities fraud, market manipulation, wire fraud, and conspiracy." "Hazel Montgomery Blackwell, you're under arrest for accessory to attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of a federal investigation." She gestured to the cameras still broadcasting. "Everything you said tonight is time-stamped federal evidence with 147,000 witnesses watching in real time." Vincent found his voice reflexive, lawyer training kicking in. "This is illegal entrapment. You broadcast private conversations without consent. You violated wiretapping statutes and constitutional privacy protections. You confessed to 15 years of organized crime on a public live stream you knew was recording." Celeste pulled zip-tie restraints from her vest. "That's not entrapment, Mr. Crane. That's voluntary disclosure with viral distribution. You bragged about market manipulation to a camera you acknowledged with full awareness federal prosecutors were watching. Your lawyer can explain the distinction during arraignment." 2 agents extracted a small pistol from Sterling's jacket pocket with careful handling. Another team secured Vincent, whose arrogance was reformulating into legal strategy. Hazel submitted to restraints with cold calculation, her mind running through appeals and constitutional challenges, even as agents read her Miranda rights. From the server room, 32 floors below, I watched through camera feeds as 3 apex predators became shackled defendants. Their dynasty collapsed into evidence bags and booking procedures, their empire distilled to arraignment schedules and detention hearings. The thing about building traps is, you have to be certain the teeth will hold. We'd built ours from viral evidence and public testimony from 147,000 witnesses who'd watched predators confess on live broadcast, from documentation so thorough no corporate lawyer could suppress it. Service elevator to federal transport vehicles. Celeste directed her team with practiced efficiency. Building perimeters secured, no corporate lawyers, no emergency injunctions, no Blackwell money buys exit strategies tonight. The agents marched all three defendants toward the service corridor Leonie and I had used hours earlier. Sterling moved like an automaton, still trying to reconcile the waitress-turned-agent with his worldview of controllable variables. Vincent threw out legal terms and procedural objections that would mean nothing against time-stamped witnesses. Hazel walked in silence, already building her defense strategy in handcuffs. You realize this live stream operation will be challenged in federal court for constitutional violations? Hazel's voice stayed ice calm despite the restraints. Challenge it with 2.3 million witnesses who watched you discuss institutional child selection and thallium procurement on voluntary public broadcast. Celeste checked her tactical watch where the cumulative view counter climbed in real time. Constitutional law loves viral confessions with permanent documentation. 32 floors below, Leonie's hand found mine in the server room darkness. She was watching Sterling disappear into the service elevator in handcuffs, and for the first time in 3 years, she drew breath without calculating escape routes or checking sight lines. The monster was caged, and 2.3 million people had witnessed the cage lock shut in permanent public record. The service elevator doors closed on 3 shackled predators at 8:43 p.m. I killed the live stream at 8:44. By the time the signal cut, the clip had already gone viral, redistributed across platforms faster than any legal team could file takedown requests, accumulating replays and shares from every continent. The final counter settled at 2,307,634 total views across all platforms. Enough witnesses to fill 23 stadiums. Enough documentation to survive every suppression motion. Vincent's lawyers would file enough viral distribution to guarantee public trial with inescapable evidence that no corporate money could seal or suppress. Enough documentation to survive every suppression motion. Vincent's lawyers would file enough viral distribution to guarantee public trial with inescapable evidence that no corporate money could seal or suppress. 32 floors below, federal transport vehicles waited with engines running and attorneys already filing emergency motions that would fail against millions of witnesses. The sharks were caught. But the blood was still in the water, and we were about to learn whether you could survive destroying monsters without becoming evidence yourself. The federal debriefing took 4 hours across 2 days, encrypted video calls where prosecutors walked Leonie and me through timeline documentation and witness coordination and the constitutional bulletproofing that would keep viral evidence admissible in court. We survived by becoming evidence time-stamped, cataloged, preserved in legal amber, alongside 2.3 million witnesses who'd watched predators confess. 6 days after the broadcast, FBI agent Marcus Sims called with the kind of methodical legal update that meant the machinery was working exactly as designed, and I felt nothing but hollow, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sterling Blackwell detained without bail on 11 federal counts, including attempted murder and elder exploitation. Agent Sims's voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who delivered 1,000 status reports. He was 40-something career field agent handling federal prosecution coordination, the kind of institutional operator who made complex cases flow through bureaucratic channels. His attorneys filed 18 motions in 5 days, all denied. The live stream evidence is constitutionally bulletproof. I was sitting in my Bellevue Craftsman living room phone on speaker sunlight, cutting through windows that overlooked the same street where Evelyn used to plant tulips every spring. What about Vincent Crane? 26 RICO counts carrying minimum 40 years combined. Federal prosecutors are treating this as flagship case law for viral evidence admissibility. Papers rustled on his end. Hazel Blackwell's situation is complicated. That word complicated carried weight that had nothing to do with legal procedure. I waited. Toxicology confirms lethal thallium accumulation with cascading organ failure. Medical opinion gives her 3 to 6 weeks, possibly less. Sims paused, letting that land. The thallium Sterling had been administering for months, completed its work, while both of them sat in federal detention, Hazel dying from a poison her son had set in motion long before any arrest warrant existed, the damage too advanced for treatment to reverse. Sterling had successfully murdered his mother before he ever set foot in a courtroom. She engineered him to operate exactly this way, and he's completing the dynasty's self-destruction on schedule. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. Hazel Northcott, who selected Sterling from institutional catalogs, who shaped him into ruthless corporate weapon, dying from his calculated poisoning, while lawyers argued procedural motions. The architect murdered by her own design. And Leonie's mortgage, my voice came out flat mechanical, nullified yesterday with federal backing. For the first time, Sims sounded almost pleased. The house reverts to her name fraud charges added to Vincent's RICO count. She's legally clear and financially restored, Mr. Mercer. Your daughter got her home back. I thanked him. Ended the call. Sat in sunlight that felt like it belonged to someone else's afternoon. Sterling detained. Hazel dying. Vincent facing 40 years. Leonie restored. The wheels of justice grinding exactly as designed, and I felt disconnected from all of it, watching my own victory through bulletproof glass, hearing triumph through noise-canceling headphones that muffled everything into distant static. 3 days later, Celeste sent the full evidence file via encrypted federal portal, 847 pages of investigation documentation, cross-reference testimony, forensic analysis, timeline reconstruction. I opened it at midnight when the house was dark and quiet, and I could pretend I was the only person awake in the city. The file covered 15 years of Vincent Crane's operations, market manipulation, elder exploitation, staged accidents, coordinated fraud. I read methodically the way I used to read technical specifications, looking for patterns and failure points and the elegant logic that held complex systems together. How many other names in those 847 pages were dismissed as accidents, random tragedies, cruel statistical inevitabilities, when they were actually line items in Vincent Crane's operational methodology? Testing? How many families grieved random drunk drivers and unfortunate timing and bad luck, never knowing they'd lost someone to calculated murder disguised as chaos? I found the answer on page 312. The section header read, Cross-referenced Vehicle Forensics Analysis, subsection 4C, Pattern Methodology Comparison. Below that, 2 case files linked by forensic similarities. The first, Mercer Evelyn March, 14th, 2019 deceased. The second, Voss Rachel, July 22nd, 2023 deceased. Between them, 4 years and 1,800 miles, and the same staging methodology, intersection approach, speed sightline, obstruction impact angle, calculated for maximum fatality, probability with minimum witness clarity. The file detailed weather conditions, vehicle acceleration patterns, post-impact routing, forensic precision for murder, disguised as drunk driving, and Evelyn had been the beta version. Vincent tested his vehicular homicide technique on my wife, refining timing and positioning before executing the same method on Rachel Voss. She wasn't collateral damage in someone else's war. She was a practice swing, a calibration run, a meaningless test before the real target. 5 years, I thought, random drunk driver, random intersection, random cruel luck. 5 years, I processed grief as senseless tragedy, the universe's indifferent chaos, claiming someone I loved for no reason at all. And it was Vincent Crane testing his murder logistics, like a chef prepping ingredients, selecting my wife because she happened to match his operational parameters, right? Age right. Vehicle type, right intersection, characteristics for staging. Vehicular accident with low investigation probability. The revelation didn't feel like anger or rage or any emotion I had vocabulary for. It felt like falling through solid ground into a basement I hadn't known existed, discovering my entire foundation was built over nothing. I sat in absolute darkness at 3:47 a.m., the 847-page file glowing on my laptop screen like autopsy photography for my entire marriage. Then I picked up my phone and texted Leonie, "Breakfast tomorrow, I need to tell you something about your mother." The reply came instantly. 3 words that felt like lifeline thrown into drowning water. Yes, always yes. Leonie arrived at 8:17 a.m. carrying bakery, croissants, and the kind of careful composure that meant she'd been awake all night preparing for whatever truth I needed to share. We sat at the oak table where the investigation began 3 months earlier, where we'd first spread out Sterling's financial documents and Hazel's institutional assessments, and built the trap that caught 3 predators on viral broadcast. Now the table held coffee and pastries, and the weight of revelation that would transform how she understood her mother's death. I showed her page 312 on my laptop. Let her read the forensic analysis, the cross-reference methodology, the clinical language that described murder disguised as drunk driving. Watched her face as she processed what the evidence file stated in bureaucratic precision. Evelyn Mercer, March 14, 2019, wasn't random collision or cruel statistical inevitability. She was Vincent Crane's logistics test for the vehicular homicide method he'd refine and execute on Rachel Voss 4 years later. So we didn't just catch the man who tried to kill me. Leonie's voice stayed steady, but her hand trembled slightly around her coffee mug. We caught the man who murdered Mom and thought he could refine the technique. The FBI confirmed it, I said, matching forensic signatures across both scenes. Your mother wasn't random, she was the rehearsal. I'd expected her to shatter. Expected rage or tears or the kind of breakdown that comes when random tragedy reveals itself as deliberate murder. Instead, she sat quiet for a long moment, staring at the screen, and when she looked up, her eyes held something I hadn't anticipated: integration. Not healing exactly, but the kind of transformation that happens when disconnected grief finds meaning. The live stream made sure every victim gets named. I pulled up the Federal Evidence Index, the master list of Vincent's operations spanning 15 years. Evelyn Mercer, 2019. Rachel Voss, 2023. Every practice run, every operational target, it's permanent federal record now. Not accidents, not random tragedies. Documented murders with prosecution and legal memory. She's not invisible anymore. Leonie reached across the oak table and took my hand. 5 years, we thought, drunk driver, bad intersection, wrong place, wrong time. But she was murdered, Dad, and we caught the man who did it. We made sure he couldn't refine the method again. The oak table held coffee and croissants, and the weight of 2 griefs now understood as connected points on Vincent Crane's operational timeline. Mother and daughter, both targeted by the same predator's evolving methodology, one as practice and one as operational deployment. But instead of shattering us, the revelation bound us together. Not investigator protecting victim anymore. Equal partners bearing witness, converting individual trauma into shared purpose that honored Evelyn's memory and our survival. We sat there until the coffee went cold, reading through the victim list, speaking the names Vincent had dismissed as collateral logistics. 17 people across 15 years from practice, runs to operational targets, all reduced to methodology testing in his operational files. And every single name would be read into federal grand jury testimony, transformed from invisible casualties into prosecutorial foundation. 6 weeks later, we stood in the federal courthouse corridor while Celeste Hampton delivered the official victim notification. Late November sunlight cut through institutional windows, illuminating marble floors and the brass plaques commemorating justice delivered across decades. Vivica Voss stood beside us, her resurrection from Sterling's murder attempt, now public record and permanent testimony. 3 federal grand juries had spent 48 hours reviewing live stream evidence and FBI documentation before returning true bills that would define the rest of 3 lives. United States versus Sterling. Cole Blackwell, 11 counts. Celeste read from the formal indictment notification with the careful precision of someone who understood these words carried weight beyond legal procedure. Conspiracy to commit murder, 3 counts of murder in the first degree, elder exploitation, wire fraud, RICO violations. 3 murders. I'd expected attempted murder conspiracy, the charges that matched what we'd documented. Hazel Blackwell died in federal custody November 8th from organ failure, secondary to chronic thallium poisoning. Celeste's voice carried professional sympathy. Sterling successfully murdered his mother, the woman who selected him from institutional assessments, and engineered him into the perfect corporate predator. The matricide is complete, and the murder charge reflects that. The irony was so absolute it felt like cosmic justice. Hazel, who'd treated children as interchangeable components, who'd shaped Sterling into ruthless weapon, killed by his calculated poisoning, while federal prosecutors built the case against him. The architect murdered by her own design, exactly as she'd programmed him to operate. United States versus Vincent Edward Crane, 26 counts under RICO statute. Celeste continued through the indictment. 15 years of operations, 17 documented victims, pattern enterprise conspiracy spanning multiple jurisdictions. Rachel gets justice now. Vivica's voice was rough damage from Sterling's strangulation attempt. Her name's in federal record, not just coroner's file marked accidental. Evelyn Mercer, Rachel Voss. The institutional victims Hazel exploited. Every name read into grand jury testimony becomes permanent legal memory. Celeste met my eyes with understanding that went beyond professional duty. They're not practice runs anymore, Mr. Mercer. They're prosecutorial foundation. The live stream made sure of that. I watched Celeste read Evelyn's name into federal record and felt something unlock in my chest. 5 years of believing random tragedy, now transformed into documented murder with prosecution and permanent legal memory that no corporate lawyer could suppress or seal. In the federal courthouse corridor, Celeste finished reading the victim list, 17 names, spanning 15 years, from practice runs to operational targets, all now permanent prosecutorial record. Leonie's hand found mine, and Vivica stood with us, as the names of the dead were spoken into law. Healing required different work than prosecution. The weeks after the indictments, I returned to my workshop, and the white oak projects I'd abandoned in October, hand planes and joinery, the methodical craft that had centered me for 30 years. 3 weeks after the grand jury delivered its verdicts, Celeste Hampton showed up at my garage with an off-record question that meant she'd finally connected dots I'd hoped would stay scattered. How does a civilian carpenter execute military-grade electronic bypass on institutional security systems without leaving forensic signature? She stood in the doorway, backlit by December afternoon sun, professional curiosity edged with something that might have been admiration or concern. Your work on the 1,200 Stewart security grid was textbook Blackwood Crew methodology, titanium picks, non-destructive entry, zero forensic trace. FBI archived that crew in 1995 after they disbanded without arrests. I set down the hand plane I'd been using on a white oak board and walked to the back corner of my workshop, where a steel toolbox sat under 30 years of accumulated sawdust and legitimacy. The lock opened to my touch muscle memory that survived 3 decades dormant. Inside, wrapped in aged velvet that had once been midnight blue, lay the instruments of my first career. Titanium lockpicks in graduated sizes, electronic bypass modules that predated modern digital security, tension wrenches calibrated to commercial-grade cylinders, and the small brass emblem we'd each carried a carpenter's square crossed with skeleton keys. I was the carpenter. The words felt strange after so many years of burial. Blackwood Crew, 1987 to 1994. 7 years running institutional and commercial safes, high-end, nonviolent burglary, the kind of work that required precision and patience and absolute silence. I walked away clean when I met Evelyn, married her without ever mentioning what I'd been buried, the tools, and learned legitimate joinery. Raised a daughter who never knew her father used to break and enter for a living. Celeste picked up one of the titanium picks, tested its weight with professional appreciation. These are museum pieces, elite-level safe-cracking tools from an era before biometric security and digital surveillance. You kept them for 30 years. Insurance I hoped I'd never need. I took the pick from her hand, felt its familiar balance. When Leonie called me in October saying Sterling was trying to kill her, I knew the investigation would require skills beyond carpentry. The Blackwood methodology, non-destructive entry, zero trace evidence patient observation, it was still there underneath 3 decades of legitimate work. Muscle memory and technical expertise preserved in mothballs until my daughter needed surgery only a safecracker could perform. The titanium picks lay in aged velvet, like surgical instruments for breaking and entering 30 years, dormant but still precise criminal tools waiting in darkness for the one operation that would justify their preservation. You came out of 30-year retirement to protect Leonie using skills from your criminal past. Celeste returned the pick to its velvet bed with careful reverence. That's either the most beautiful redemption arc or the most dangerous relapse I've documented in federal service. Redemption only works if you use what you learned from darkness to protect what you built in light. I closed the toolbox, locked it with the same practiced motion I'd used to open it. Evelyn never knew what I'd been, but she's the reason I stayed reformed. Leonie's the reason I remembered how. And the Blackwood skills put 3 predators in federal custody instead of my daughter in a grave. Celeste nodded slowly, processing implications that wouldn't make it into any official report. The bypass work stays off record. Federal prosecutors have enough evidence from the live stream and FBI documentation. They don't need to examine how you installed that equipment. But I needed to know if you were going back to the old work. The toolbox goes back under the sawdust. I met her eyes with certainty built from 3 decades of legitimate craft. I was the carpenter twice in my life, once for money, once for family. The second time was retirement party and final performance combined. She left satisfied, and I returned to the white oak that had waited patiently through our conversation. January arrived with cold clarity, bringing New Year and the kind of workshop silence that made space for methodical creation. I was working foundation boards with my hand-plane feeling white oak yield to properly sharpened blade when my phone rang with Leonie's number. "Dad, I'm calling with news." Her voice carried excitement carefully contained. "I'm pregnant. 12 weeks confirmed. You're going to be a grandfather." The hand-plane stilled in my grip. White oak shavings curled under the blade the way they had in October, when this began. But now each stroke carried different weight. Not desperate father hunting predators, but grandfather building foundations for child who'd never know Sterling Blackwell's name or carry trauma as inherited burden. After everything we survived, new life feels like defiance. I set down the plane, let the words settle into workshop quiet. Like the universe saying trauma doesn't get final word on our family story. You built foundations that outlasted the predator's dad. Leonie's voice held the kind of integrated strength that comes from surviving darkness and choosing light anyway. White oak and titanium picks, and love that wouldn't let me disappear. This baby gets to grow on ground you made safe, reformed safecrackers' precision, layered with carpenter's devotion, criminal skills weaponized for protection instead of profit. That's the inheritance that matters. We talked through details, due date, health plans, and when she hung up, I stood in my workshop, surrounded by white oak boards and the faint scent of walnut oil and sawdust that had defined 30 years of legitimate work. The toolbox sat in its corner, under accumulated dust, its contents retired again after one final perfect operation. Evelyn's memory lived in every joint I'd cut, every foundation I'd built. Leonie's survival proved that love, backed by elite skills, legitimate or otherwise, could defeat predators who thought money bought invincibility. I picked up the handplane and returned to work, watching white oak shavings settle across my workshop floor like snow that promised spring underneath. A good foundation always outlasts the storm. Evelyn taught me that through 15 years of marriage, and I'd proved it with titanium picks and carpenter's joints and devotion that refused to let darkness consume my daughter. The baby would inherit safety, not trauma. Generational hope built on reformed criminals' precision and father's protection growing in light that predators couldn't extinguish. And to you listening to my story, remember this. A father's revenge isn't about rage, it's about justice and protection. For 30 years, I buried who I'd been ashamed of my criminal past. I thought hiding those skills made me a better father. But when Leonie needed me, I learned that it's not the tools you possess that define you, it's what you choose to do with them. Don't make my mistake of thinking your past can only haunt you. Sometimes it saves the people you love most. The lesson I carried through this journey was patience, not passive waiting, but active patience that builds evidence and waits for the perfect moment. When facing predators with institutional power, father revenge requires precision and planning, not just anger. I believe God gave me those skills for a reason, not to profit from crime, but to protect my daughter when legitimate systems move too slowly. Every victim deserves someone willing to fight for them, and sometimes the path to justice means weaponizing your past to protect your future. What would you have done in my position? Would you have trusted the system or taken matters into your own hands? Leave a comment with your thoughts on this father's revenge story. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Father's Vengeance for more stories like this. Thank you for staying until the very end. This story contains fictionalized elements created for reflection. What I hope you take with you is the message that love, patience, and the willingness to fight for family can transform even the darkest past into something meaningful.